Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere. Ancient, quiet, and just a little absurd. The strange, sleepy city of Babylon, where even blinking at the wrong person might be a regulated act. You're standing in the heart of Mesopotamia, where dust clings to every surface like parchment, where river reeds sway along the edges of canals, designed not just for water, but for control. The sun hangs low over square roofs and terraced ziggurats casting long shadows across the clay streets. And everywhere you look, rules, written, etched, whispered, enforced. It's mesmerizing and just a little suffocating. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the ancient streets of Babylon, the soles of your sandals softening with dust. The sky glows with heat, hazy blue fading to a copper glare. Merchants bark, prices and voices practice like songs. A goat yells at a pot. Someone laughs behind a door carved with sigils of protection. But none of it is random because here in Babylon, every gesture, every pathway, every word has precedent. You stop beside a clay tablet embedded in a wall. It's not just decoration, it's law. Hammurabi's code, or at least a copy of it, etched carefully by someone who likely dreamed in cuneiform. One corner is chipped, the other features a rule about barley theft. You squint at it. The punishments are precise and not exactly sleep-friendly. Let's just say if your ox wanders, so mite your ears. But beneath that hard edge is something strangely beautiful, a desire for order. For structure in a world of floods and famine and gods with very specific moods. Babylon thrives on that structure. It rises from a flat plain in broad, right-angled blocks, baked mud brick walls slanting toward the Tigris River like thoughtful eyebrows. The layout of the city was no accident. Historians still argue whether its grand symmetry was inspired by the stars by spiritual geometry, or by the simple fact that it's hard to fit a goat cart down a curving street. Still, every square and alley seems arranged with deliberateness, designed to guide not only your feet, but your behavior. Want to cut across the king's courtyard? Better hope you're invited. Thinking of reclining during midday when you're a junior scribe. That's a Class D infraction. Possibly. Even the gardens whisper protocol. You pass a lush patch of date palms arranged in perfect rows guarded by a statue of a lion, whose face has long since eroded, but whose stare you still feel. These weren't just aesthetic choices. Gardens were public symbols of discipline and generosity, carefully maintained and recorded in tax ledgers. If a noble let his cucumbers wither, someone somewhere was scribbling it down. You pause at the edge of a plaza. A boy with copper-colored braids runs by, chasing a hoop made from bone. He laughs, trips, and rolls into a woman carrying a basket of lentils. A few spill. She gasps, and then she doesn't yell, doesn't scold. She simply looks toward a temple guard seated nearby, nods once and rights her basket. No shouting match, no dramatic scene. Just the quiet acknowledgement that rules exist and someone's always watching. Because yes, there are guards. Dozens. Posted at temple gates near market scales, even at bakeries. Not all wear armor, some just wear the sash of authority. But they're there to ensure the scrolls are obeyed. The scrolls that regulate what weight your bread should be. The scrolls that say how many steps a widow must take during mourning. The scrolls that probably define whether humming while plucking figs is sacred or seditious. You wander toward a public fountain where scribes gather to debate their favorite section of the code. No, really. You overhear one say, paragraph 196 is elegant. Another shakes his head. 197 has better poetic balance. You think they're joking. You hope they're joking. And yet there's an odd comfort in this rigidity. You don't have to guess how to behave. You don't have to wonder if your neighbor will claim your goat by shouting louder. Everything's written, recorded, filed. Even your dreams might be classified if you told them to the wrong priest. That's what's most fascinating here, not just that Babylon has rules, but that it trusts them. It's a city of believers not only in gods, but in ledgers. If something is written on clay, it's halfway to divine, which might explain the mud brick obsession. The walls rise in perfect tiers clay fused by time and repetition. Each house a block in a breathing equation. You run your hand across the wall of a butcher's shop and find beneath the surface the faint imprint of a cuneiform receipt. Meat date purchaser, still legible, still binding. You glance up and catch the gaze of a woman on a balcony above. Her veil is indigo, her bracelets bronze. She watches you not with suspicion, but with formality. A stranger walking alone in this neighborhood? Not a problem, but noted. Logged, maybe. Whispered over dinner. Because nothing in Babylon happens in isolation. Your choices ripple through the bureaucracy like ink through papyrus. That barley you bought taxed. That amphora you broke filed. That song you hummed at the wine shop evaluated for tone and political subtext. And yet, you feel safe here. Cradled by ritual. Swaddled in norms so old they've outlived their original purpose. The air is warm. The stone beneath your feet holds the day's heat like a memory. And somewhere behind you, a priest recites the weather forecast based on goat spleens and moon shadows. He's rarely wrong. You keep walking, because in Babylon, wandering has its own path, its own permission. Just don't stray too far from the center. Don't speak too loudly after sundown. And above all, don't step on the temple threshold with your left foot first. That would be complicated. You follow a dusty trail that curves between low clay homes and garden courtyards where the scent of crushed coriander and slow roasting onions drifts lazily through the air. Babylon may be strict, but it is never bland. Even its discipline is perfumed. A man dozes beside a basket of figs. A dog eyes him with judgment. Somewhere a bronze wind chime tinkles. You drift forward, guided by curiosity and a quiet sense that every corner hides another rule you're about to almost break. Soon you find yourself approaching one of the city's more curious features, the House of Forms. Not a palace, not a temple, but a repository of bureaucratic bliss. Here nestled between two shrines to forgotten river gods, Babylon keeps its paperwork alive. Walls of shelves, stacks of scrolls, clay tablets that record everything from marriage dowries to goat hair disputes. And yes, there are social rules about how you access the rules. You hesitate at the doorway where two scribes are mid-debate about seating hierarchies for a city banquet that took place 3 summers ago. The older one insists nobles must always be seated by age unless they possess 3 or more oxen. The younger counters that charisma should be a metric. You slip past them and into the vaulted room. The ceiling is low and cool. The light filters in through latticed windows, casting patterned shadows that ripple across the stacks. Every scroll is bound with colored thread blue for legal red, for domestic gold, for religious. You brush your fingers over one labeled, Proper Greetings for Rainy Days. Another is titled, simply, Staring Etiquette of. You lift it. The clay is cool in your hands. The tablet warns against holding eye contact longer than 4 heartbeats unless you are a delivering legal news BE, betrothed, or CA recognized oracle. You quickly put it back. Historians still argue whether these social codes were rigidly enforced, or simply aspirational, a way to signal refinement, like using 5 forks at dinner while secretly eating lentils with your fingers at home. But the codes were real, and their presence shaped everything from weddings to weather discussions. And speaking of weddings, Babylon had those down to a science. If you're a woman of marriageable age, there's an entire scroll dictating the timing of your betrothal, the color of your tunic saffron, but only if your grandmother approves, and how many paces you should walk behind your future spouse at your engagement ceremony. If you're a man, you must present a dowry not just gold or livestock, but an item that reflects your moral readiness. Popular options include small carved tablets of Enkai or strangely well-polished sandals. The shinier, the better. You're tempted to ask why. A nearby scribe mutters clean shoes, clean heart. You decide not to challenge him. There are rituals for courtship, too. One tablet reads, A man may speak of grain of stars or of dreams, but not of his own strength until the 3rd meeting. Another notes that compliments must follow a specific order, first the mind, then the voice, lastly the eyes. Any deviation risks offending both the recipient and the local priestess of Ishtar. It's all incredibly detailed and incredibly exhausting. And yet you find yourself smiling. Because beneath all the rigidity is a kind of communal poetry. A shared agreement to turn every interaction into a slow dance, measured, deliberate, sometimes absurd, but always tethered to meaning. Outside, the day warms further. You leave the house of forms behind, blinking against the light as your eyes adjust. You wander back into the marketplace where the rules shift once more. Here, haggling is practically theater. There's a rhythm to it, an accepted script that must be followed. You hear it now as a woman in a russet veil argues over the price of chickpeas. I offer 1 shekel, she says. The merchant gasps. You wound me. I offer 2. Have mercy. I offer 3. He smiles, a generous soul. They exchange the coins and goods with the flair of veteran performers. You wonder what would happen if someone skipped a line. Would the purchase collapse? Would the chickpeas sour? You spot another merchant selling small wax tablets etched with standard phrases for busy buyers too expensive. My cousin sells it cheaper, and I shall return with my brother. Think of them as the Mesopotamian version of texting templates. Swipe right for sass. Swipe left for fish sauce. You drift past a weaver laying out dyed linen. His tunics are arranged by social station. Workers' robes in browns and grays, mid-tier in teal and olive. Priestly whites shimmer behind a thin veil. You know not to touch them. That would be unfortunate. Suddenly a child bumps into your leg. He's barefoot grinning, carrying a wax token shaped like a rabbit. His mother hurries after him, offering you a deep nod and a quiet apology, precisely the kind of apology expected for minor disruptions in shared civic spaces. It's efficient, elegant, over in seconds. Elegant? Over in... That's the thing about Babylon. You're always performing, but so is everyone else. Even greetings follow rules. Say peace to your house when approaching a doorway. Unless it's past sundown, then it's light to your hearth. And if the person is seated higher than you, you add a with respect at the end. Miss one word, and you might be marked as poorly raised. Or worse, a Sumerian. You try a greeting on an old man resting in a shaded arch. Peace to your house, with respect, you say. He doesn't answer, just snorts. Wrong order, he mutters. You bow and retreat. You make your way toward a temple courtyard where elders sit under palm trees, sipping cool date water and whispering about omens. You hear them debating a recent omen involving 3 black dogs and a broken ladder. One says war, another says marriage. I say indigestion, one mutters. You don't interrupt. The temple dogs would not appreciate that. There's a serenity to it all. These unspoken understandings. This shared culture of watchfulness and restraint. Of codes written in clay and reinforced in glances. You feel like you're inside a play that's been running for centuries. The cast changes, but the script remains. You lie down on a sun-warmed bench, hands folded over your chest. The breeze carries the scent of cumin and old papyrus. Somewhere nearby, a scribe recites a proverb about patience and river stones. You close your eyes, because in Babylon even napping has rules. Never nap facing north. Never nap in a doorway. And if you must nap in public, at least remember to look wise. You blink slowly back into the light, still half dreaming of figs and footsteps, and stretch your limbs like an aging lion. The bench beneath you creaks softly, and for a fleeting second, you think perhaps it is also subject to regulation. Maybe some ancient clay tablet warns do not nap on a holy bench for longer than the length of one water jug's shadow. You chuckle softly to yourself because, honestly, in Babylon it might exist. Now that you've spent some time absorbing the codes of greetings, weddings, and merchant theatrics, it's time to explore an even more delicate subject, the fine art of hosting. In ancient Babylon, hospitality was more than a virtue. It was a public performance of status wisdom and moral fiber. You didn't just offer a guest food. You offered them a demonstration of your social competence. The path leads you past a garden lined with narrow irrigation channels, each one burbling like a very specific set of instructions. You follow the sound until it guides you toward a modest but carefully arranged home. A woman stands at the gate pouring water onto the step not for cleaning, but as a ritual signal that her home is ready to receive guests. It's subtle, elegant, damp. You hesitate, then offer the proper phrase, light to your threshold. She smiles, and health to your sandals. You're in. Inside, the first thing you notice is the placement of seating. This is a test. You must not sit first. You must not choose the seat nearest the wall that one is reserved for the guest of highest age or wisdom. You hover politely, watching her gesture to a woven cushion near the center. You sit precisely at the angle that ensures you're not pointing your feet at the hearth. It's basic etiquette, of course. Pointed feet equal disrespect unless you're in mourning, in which case all bets are off, and you may sit sideways and chew loudly. Babylon makes exceptions for grief. She brings out water first poured from a ceramic pitcher shaped like a lion with unfortunate facial features. You accept it with both hands, tilt the cup slightly to the left, never the right that's reserved for priests, and take a slow sip. Now you are ready to talk. And talk you must. In Babylonian social hosting, silence is only golden if it lasts less than 10 heartbeats. After that, it becomes suspicious. The host might assume you are judging her cushions, or worse, composing a song about her poorly arranged lentils. So you compliment the aroma in the air cumin cardamom, maybe a hint of something toasted. She nods in satisfaction and brings out the next phase bread. Bread is never served alone. That would be barbaric. It must be accompanied by something symbolic: salt, to show sincerity, oil to indicate abundance, or dates if the guest has recently lost a goat. You, having lost no goats, receive salt and a very small olive. It's a good sign. Historians still argue whether these customs evolved from religious practice or simple superstition. Some claim the presence of salt wards off evil spirits. Others say it just keeps the conversation seasoned. Either way, declining bread without an excuse approved by the priesthood is a social disaster. You eat. There's a moment now when the conversation must take a turn. The host shifts her weight and brings out something wrapped in cloth. It is, of course, a small clay tablet. She hands it to you. You try not to gulp. It's a question tablet. Babylonians had a delightful habit of preparing conversation starters, etched in clay left near the hearth, or passed discreetly to guests. Your tablet reads, "Which god is most likely to laugh at humans and why?" You think for a moment, then answer Nabu. He sees everything you write and still lets you send it. She laughs. You have passed the test. If the guest answers poorly, say, by invoking the wrong deity, or worse, saying, "I don't know," a polite Babylonian host will still smile, but she will also adjust the placement of her sandals, shifting them toward the door. A quiet signal that perhaps the visit is winding down. You glance at her feet. They remain pointed inward. You are safe. The conversation turns naturally to community gossip. A neighbor's dog has been stealing eggs. The fishmonger's son wants to marry above his trade class. A temple scribe was caught using ink meant for the goddess's scrolls to write love poems instead. Scandalous. You ask cautiously if the punishment for that's serious. She raises an eyebrow. He has to copy hymns to Shamash for a week, using his non-dominant hand. You wince. That's brutal. The rules of hospitality are strict, but they are not unkind. Hosts are expected to provide not just food and comfort, but also emotional shelter. If a guest cries, the host must pretend not to notice until the third tear falls. At that point, a perfumed cloth is offered, scented with myrrh. If the grief is noble with time, if the sadness is more ambiguous. Today there are no tears, just warmth. She brings out a final offering, a bowl of roasted chickpeas, and a small token, a clay amulet shaped like a fish. For protection, she says, and because you have kind eyes. You thank her, bow the appropriate number of times twice with a half step backward, and step out into the street. The sun is lower now, and the alleys shimmer with that honey-colored light Babylon does so well. You clutch the amulet in your hand, feeling the worn ridges where hundreds of fingers may have touched it before you. You pass a group of youths playing a game involving hoops and painted stones. One tosses a pebble into the air and recites a rhyme. Ishtar sees you when you sleep. Nergal counts your toes. You're not entirely sure that's how it goes, but it's hauntingly catchy. As you stroll, you consider everything that's past, how even a simple meal is a map of unspoken rules. How a host reads your silences like omens. How bread becomes a measure of worth, and how even a casual gift can be a social fingerprint. You pass a small fountain where someone has left a wedge of melon balanced on the edge. It's an offering, to whom you're not sure, but you bow slightly as you pass. Just in case. Because here in Babylon, even politeness has a prayer. The streets have thinned now, with only the occasional merchant closing up shop or a child darting through the shadows, chasing the last streaks of daylight. You make your way through a side alley where lamps begin to flicker into life, tiny bowls of oil and flame, cradled in niches carved into mud brick walls. One dances just for you as you pass like a tiny spirit yawning. The air smells of cumin roasted garlic, and something suspiciously like laundry hung out too long. Your next destination is a place most Babylonian citizens wouldn't openly admit to frequenting, but almost all do: the diviner's court. It's part temple, part open-air drama, and entirely woven into the everyday decisions of Babylonian life. What you eat when you marry, if you build that second story on your home, all of it might depend on what the liver says. Yes, the liver. You arrive at the small temple square just as an apprentice priest, barely older than a sheep, is sweeping away a chalk drawing of a celestial omen. A few onlookers murmur softly, debating whether the owl drawn in the stars last night means disaster or disappointing date night. You pause beneath a painted frieze, showing a figure bent solemnly over a table holding what is unmistakably a sheep's liver. The caption, still legible, reads, "Seek wisdom not in sky nor scroll, but in warm innards." Classic Babylon. Inside the courtyard, you find a group of citizens seated in a loose semicircle. In the center, a diviner in a deep russet robe prepares the tools of his trade. There's no theatrical smoke or booming chants. Just quiet murmurs, the flutter of clay tablets being exchanged, and the soft squelch of meat being carefully inspected. The ritual is simple. Someone with a question: will my shipment arrive safely? Is my neighbor plotting against me? Should I buy that goat? Offers a sheep. The animal is sacrificed with as much reverence as practicality. The liver is extracted. And then the reading begins. It's not as messy as it sounds. The liver, you learn, is mapped like a cosmic board game. Each bump and depression corresponds to a realm of influence, commerce, romance, war weather, even headaches. The diviner consults a clay model, rotating it gently as he compares liver and diagram. You notice the model has been annotated with charcoal lines and the occasional exasperated sigh etched into its base. Tonight's question is from a sandal merchant wondering whether his rival is cursing his stock. The diviner tilts the liver squints and hums. A cloud over the gallbladder, he intones. Trouble in trade. Perhaps envy. The merchant exhales heavily, nodding like this confirms everything he already suspected. A few murmurs of agreement ripple through the crowd. Historians still argue whether Babylonian liver omens were genuinely believed or simply a state-approved form of group therapy. After all, it's comforting to blame a suspicious gallbladder bulge for your lack of customers, rather than admit your sandal designs are outdated. But that's the beauty of it. Divination in Babylon wasn't about fortune-telling in the flashy crystal ball sense. It was woven into the infrastructure of civic life. Government officials consulted omens before launching projects. Farmers used them to time their planting. A general once delayed a military campaign because a bird sat too long on his left shoulder. And that brings you to bird signs. You hear the gentle flapping before you see them, 3 crows swooping down to land on the temple's outer wall. The priest nods slightly, then raises his hand. Flight from the west. Odd number. Clashing calls. The meaning a quarrel is brewing among the elders. Possibly over grain distribution. Possibly over whose goat keeps chewing through the city scroll bins. You try not to smile. Because here, birds are not just birds. They are messengers of Marduk and Nebu omens given feathers. There are clay tablets cataloging hundreds of avian scenarios, what it means if a swallow nests under your roof luck, or if an owl blinks too slowly at your window, definitely sabotage. Possibly divine. Even everyday people pay attention. A woman beside you nudges her child, whispering, "Remember, 2 pigeons on a ledge mean peace unless they're facing north." Then it's definitely a cursed marriage. The child nods solemnly as if this will be on tomorrow's test. You shift slightly, aware of how embedded these rituals are in the rhythm of life. You'd think it exhausting checking the sky for signs, reading tea leaves into your goat's hiccups, but somehow it seems to comfort more than confuse. The diviner finishes his reading, then accepts a small pouch of barley in payment. Not silver, not coin, but barley, the food of the gods and occasionally the gods' accountants. The merchant bows, so does the priest. Balance is restored. Outside, the stars are just beginning to emerge, twinkling shyly through the haze. A group of young people gathers around a sand circle, casting small bones across its surface and squealing with delight when one lands, pointing at the wealth quadrant. You hear one of them say, "Tomorrow I'm asking Nabu if I should cut my hair." That might seem small to you, but here in Babylon, the line between the divine and the domestic is paper thin. Everything is sacred, even split ends. As you make your way toward the square's edge, a girl hands you a piece of baked clay. It's an amulet of reasonable doubt supposed to ward off false accusations, bad deals, and skeptical relatives. Only works if you believe in it, she says with a wink. You turn it over in your hand. It's shaped like an ear. To help you listen better, probably. Or maybe it's a pun. In any case, you keep it. Because you've begun to understand Babylon runs not just on grain and law, but on belief. Belief that signs matter, that rituals guide, that a crooked sheep liver can say more than 1,000 angry letters. And tonight, under the stars, with clay in your pocket and whispers in the air, you find that strangely reassuring. You leave the courtyard slowly, the murmur of liver readings and crow interpretations fading behind you like a lullaby in reverse. The streets of Babylon haven't gotten quieter, they never really do, but the sounds shift. Daytime shouting gives way to evening bargaining, and beneath the constant buzz is something calmer. You pass a woman closing her shop shutters, muttering a prayer to Ishtar under her breath, while her daughter sprinkles crushed mint across the threshold. Not for the smell, but for protection. Or maybe both. Your next stop isn't on any tourist tablet, it's one of the quieter, less glamorous corners of Babylonian life, the public water well. And before you groan, yes, it sounds boring. But Babylon had rules for everything, including how, when, and in what mood you could fetch your water. You approach the well just as a man and a boy lower a large ceramic jar together, its rope creaking with effort. The waterman on duty, a narrow-faced elder in a saffron wrap, eyes them both, then nods. When they follow the proper order, eldest dips first, then guests, then children. No skipping, no splashing, no just one quick drink. You wait in line behind a woman carrying a baby in one arm and a wicker fish basket in the other. She adjusts her veil and sighs dramatically when the man in front of her lets his jar swing too far and clack loudly against the stone. The waterman tuts, loudly, a social faux pas. Too eager, the woman whispers, probably from Kutha. You don't know what that means, but it feels like gossip. As your turn approaches, you notice a small carved tablet on the side of the well, half worn from weather and fingers. It depicts a bearded man tipping a jug, slightly water flowing in a perfect arc toward a set of marked vessels, small, medium, and large. Beneath the image, a single sentence remains clear. Measure with grace for the gods' thirst too. It's both a reminder and a rule. You don't overdraw, you don't waste, and you definitely don't fill someone else's jar unless they ask. Historians still argue whether this etiquette was rooted in environmental caution or spiritual symbolism. Either way, you quickly realize wells are where social contracts are enforced. You watch a minor standoff unfold 2 spots behind you. A merchant in a fine teal robe insists he's just filling a small jar. The waterman frowns. It's your third. A pause. And we remember what happened last month. There's a tension here, an unspoken layer of pride and performance. In Babylon, how you handle your water says as much about you as your jewelry or your prayer habits. Drawing too much too fast, greedy. Helping someone else without being asked, arrogant. Taking the last sip before someone older, prepare for social exile, or at least being talked about for weeks at the oven stalls. Finally, it's your turn. You grip the rope, feel the taut resistance, and slowly ease the jar down. The water below smells faintly of clay and something green. When you draw it up and pour a cup, the woman behind you gives a tiny nod. Well done. You sit on the edge of the stone wall, sipping. The breeze picks up, rustling the sleeves of a passing scribe. 2 children chase a lopsided hoop made of bent reeds across the square. A priest walks by and gently taps each jar with a bronze spoon, checking for cracks or maybe for curses. The water tastes clean, refreshing, and oddly earned. Next to you, a group of women lower baskets into the well, not for water, but to cool fish wrapped in leaves. A clever trick, and one with its own set of unspoken rules. You overhear only up to midday, only if wrapped tightly, and never on market feast days. Violations apparently are punished with scowls and social frost, One of them, an older woman with hands like driftwood, leans toward you and whispers, "I once saw a man spit into the well. He disappeared. I mean, not all at once, but still." She taps her temple. Don't test the water gods. You believe her. Or at least you pretend to. That's safer here. Because Babylon's public life is ruled not just by laws carved in basalt, but by expectation, by tiny rituals and reciprocal gestures. You carry a smaller jar to signal humility. You wait your turn because your grandfather did. You tip your water slightly toward the east in thanks. No one checks, but everyone notices. And if you think this is all overly complicated, remember this: in a city where thousands share narrow streets, shared water, and shared gods, etiquette becomes survival. Offend the wrong person at a well, and you might find yourself mysteriously excluded from next week's family feast. Or worse, the baker accidentally burns your barley cake. You finish your cup and return the dipper with both hands, another tiny sign of respect. The waterman nods. Approval granted. You move on. The sky is turning a dusty purple now, and you pass a group of elders playing a board game under a fig tree. The board is scratched into a stone slab, the pieces smoothed by generations of fingers. One of them looks up, squints, and says to no one in particular, "The boy who fetches water too quickly marries before his beard grows." The others laugh. You smile, unsure if it's a compliment, an insult, or both. That's the thing about Babylonian society, it's layered. What seems like a joke might be a warning. What looks like a rule might be a riddle. You learn by watching. You stay in good standing by observing not just what people do, but how they do it. A man helping his wife with a heavy jar, admirable. A man doing it while correcting her grip in public, scandalous. And the children, oh, they know the rules better than anyone. You see a girl no older than 8 scolding her younger brother for scooping water with the wrong hand. "You'll curse the house," she says. He shrugs. She narrows her eyes. He switches hands. Order is restored. As you make your way from the square, you realize something: Babylon may have been built on stone and mud brick, but its real foundation is behavior, those small invisible threads that hold everything together. And sometimes all it takes to tug those threads is a jar of water and the wrong kind of glance. So you walk a little straighter. You pass your next nod with extra confidence. And when a boy drops his cup near you, you pick it up, but don't hand it to him directly. Instead, you set it gently on the ground beside him. He nods. You've learned something. The streets glow softly now as the final threads of sun melt behind temple domes and smoke-creased rooftops. Babylon shifts once again, slipping from public bustle into something slower, sleepier, but no less observant. As you move through the narrow lanes of the Weaver's Quarter, the scent of hot dye and old wool follows you, tangled with roasting dates and the faint sting of incense curling from someone's upstairs shrine. Tonight you're heading to a dinner gathering. Not a feast those were formal, loud, filled with priests and wine and arguments about gods with too many syllables. This is smaller, more intimate. A middle-tier merchant family hosting a few neighbors, nothing fancy, which means you need to behave very carefully. Because while Babylon's elite had their own dizzying layers of formality, it's the average household that policed manners with a sharp eye and even sharper judgment. And when it came to food, how you eat, where you sit, what you say, the rules didn't just shape your evening, they could shape your reputation. You arrive at the door, sandals dusted off palms washed with rosewater from a communal basin. Inside, the host greets you with a 3-part gesture: right hand up, then heart, then open palm. You return it, not too fast, not too slow. He smiles. You're in. The home is simple but proud, painted brick reed mats along the floor, and shelves lined with family tablets and carved figurines of protective spirits. The dining area is sunken, built in a low circular pit with cushions arranged around a single wide dish. Tonight's meal is a root stew turnip, naturally mixed with lentils, coriander, and a dash of pomegranate molasses. You take your seat carefully. Not too close to the head of the circle, that would be presumptuous, but not too far either, lest you appear indifferent. Someone once sat too close to the salt bowl and wasn't invited back for months. Salt proximity was a thing. Your host nods toward the stew. My wife says the turnips were stubborn this year. You chuckle politely, unsure if that's a farming complaint or a veiled political metaphor. In Babylon, it's often both. A young girl enters carrying bread, flat, warm, lightly charred. She offers it first to the oldest guest, then clockwise. Your fifth. Accept it with your right hand. Break it with your fingers, not your teeth. And absolutely no dunking until the host has dipped first. You wait. He dips. You follow. The room relaxes. Now the conversation begins, carefully. Topics include river levels, acceptable temple renovations, safe the new barley inspector Iffy, and that one brickmaker who supposedly underfired a batch and blamed it on eclipse spirits, hilarious but cautionary. A neighbor across from you brings up a festival performance of The Cry of Inanna, noting that the actress playing the goddess showed too much ankle. This sparks mild debate. You sip your barley beer, slowly nodding at the right moments. Then someone asks you, what's the best way to soften a bitter turnip? Time slows. All eyes turn. It's not about turnips. It never is. You take a breath and answer, bury it with fennel overnight. Or sing to it, or both. A beat of silence. Then laughter. The host grins. A poet. You've passed. You let the stew settle in your mouth warm and sweet, and finally dare to relax your spine against the cushion. That one answer just bought you a week's worth of goodwill. Maybe even a casual invite to the fig orchard outing next moon. Historians still argue whether these kinds of social rituals were codified or instinctive. There's no surviving Babylonian dinner party etiquette for dummies, though. If there were, it would definitely be etched into a 3-pound clay tablet and impossible to carry discreetly. What we do know comes from receipts. Guest lists banter scrawled into the margins of letters. One such letter from a scribe named Nabushum Lisir included this line. Dinner was well prepared, though Etu sat too close to the offering plate and wore too much blue. Apparently, Etu was known for his poor taste in proximity and pigment. Color, you realize, plays a role too. Tonight you've worn russet and teal earth tones. Subtle. Had you shown up in pure indigo instant side-eye? Only priests and performers flaunted full-spectrum hues at dinner. The conversation shifts to dreams. It often does after the first bowl is cleared. One woman swears her aunt saw a fox in her sleep, and then woke to find her neighbor had moved away in shame. Another guest claims turnips invite earth dreams where you see roots as cities and cities as roots. It means your soul is grounded, she says, sipping her brew with a knowing squint. A man near you clears his throat. I once dreamt I married a river. What happened, someone asks. He shrugs. We flooded. It ended badly. More laughter. You've never eaten so quietly, so consciously. Every movement has purpose. Every crumb has an arc. Even how you clean your fingers, dab, don't rub, is watched. A young boy to your left gets scolded gently for slurping. He wilts like overcooked squash. Dessert is served figs wrapped in honeyed dough and dusted with crushed walnut. It's passed on a reed tray and everyone says health before eating. A small pause. A small prayer? Not necessarily religious, just grateful. Babylon was not always kind. You celebrated softness where you found it. The host's wife, elegant serious with a gold-threaded scarf, brings out a clay bowl filled with warm water and dried rose petals. You dip your fingers. Cleanse. Signal the end. You rise only after your host does. You thank him not just with words, but with a slight bow and a touch to your chest. You compliment the meal, but not too extravagantly. Sincerity matters more than poetry. Outside, the night is velvet soft. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a double flute. A couple argues playfully in the shadows, and a dog barks once as if to remind you the city still breathes, still watches. You walk slowly, digestion pulling at your limbs. Behind you, the dinner fades, but in your chest you carry the quiet pride of a well-played guest, of having navigated the strange, invisible currents of a culture older than reason, but rich with its own rhythms. And as you pass a window where a candle flickers low, you think again about that question. What's the best way to soften a bitter turnip? The answer, it seems, is to listen, to wait, to be present. Because in Babylon, food is never just food, it's message, mirror, metaphor. Even the smallest bowl can speak volumes. The night wraps tighter around you now like a soft cotton shawl borrowed from someone's mother. Babylon glows in places, lamplight spilling from high windows, torches stuttering near alley shrines, but mostly the city settles. You walk with quiet steps past walls etched with the graffiti of old poems and forgotten crushes, until you reach the edge of the scribe's district. Here, silence isn't absence, it's ritual. You duck beneath a low arch and step into a narrow courtyard. The walls are smooth mud brick, freshly whitewashed, and the smell of ink hangs in the air, sharp sacred. This is the House of Tablets, one of several neighborhood schools for record keeping and law. In the morning, it will echo with chants of grammar rules and the rhythmic thwack of stylus on clay drills. But tonight, only one light glows within. Your host is a middle-aged instructor named Ibby Tutu. He's been copying contracts all day, dowry agreements, trade licenses, a particularly dramatic divorce involving 2 goats and a borrowed harp. Now he's tired, tea-steeped, and generous with his time. You're here to talk about rules. Not laws, those come later. First comes training. Before a man can hold a reed stylus, Ibby says, gesturing you inside, he must learn to bow. You laugh, he doesn't. It's serious, he insists, pouring you a cup of barley tea. Scribes must obey more rules than kings. A king answers to the gods. We answer to grammar. Same thing, really, just less thunder. You sip. The tea is bitter, smoky, calming. He leads you to a shelf stacked with training tablets, some clean and sharp, others worn smooth, with generations of mistake and correction. The air smells like dust and concentration. You pick up one and see a sentence etched in firm wedges. If you see your superior, bow low. If he speaks, wait. If he asks, answer. If he sighs, apologize. Standard advice, Ibby murmurs, shrugging. We drill it into them before they're even allowed to copy receipts. Turns out Babylonian scribes were raised in layers of decorum. The rules weren't just social, they were survival. One misstep, one insulted official, and your career could stall like a flooded canal. And so you learned silence before syntax, obedience before grammar. Your posture could determine your future, literally. Stand too straight, Ibby says, mimicking it, and they think you're arrogant. Slouch too far, he hunches owl-like, and they think you're lazy. There's a sweet spot. We call it the polite bend. You try it, he nods. Close enough. Historians still argue whether the scribal schools were merit-based or elite-controlled. Some say talent rose naturally. Others say the best seats were always held by sons of priests and cousins of generals. Either way, once inside, you obeyed the ritual. And not just with posture. Dress mattered too. No sandals inside the tablet chamber. No bright dyes unless you'd passed the 3rd-level recitation exam. No perfume-scented oils were considered distracting. One poor soul wore coriander balm to class and had his tablet privileges revoked for a week. They still joke about him, smelled like a salad, wrote like a snail. Ibby pulls another tablet from the shelf, thinner and darker with age. This one special, he says softly. A code of conduct, written by an apprentice for himself. You read, do not ask for ink twice in 1 hour. Do not smirk at errors unless invited. Do not correct a senior scribe without preparing your own funeral. You raise your eyebrows. Ibby shrugs. They weren't joking. Scribes, after all, held power. Quiet power. Behind every law, every temple record, every royal decree, there was a man with the stylus. And the better behaved that man, the smoother the system ran. Sometimes that power went to their heads. Ibby tells you about a notorious scribe named Enlil Bani, who once inserted passive-aggressive footnotes into temple financial reports. Things like this figure may be off by a goat as the priest counting was distracted by wine. He got demoted. Then promoted. Then sent to manage taxes in a fishing village so remote that even the fish seemed surprised to see him. Still, Ibby says with a smirk his handwriting was impeccable. You flip through more tablets. One has nothing but a name, Dumuzi, son of Ninsen. Written 100 times, each line tighter, neater, more obedient. A punishment maybe, or a mantra. Either way it tells a story. Another bears a drawing a little stylized goat with enormous eyes. You ask if it's allowed. Technically no, Ibby says. But if it's good, we let it slide. Babylon is rigid but not heartless. And then he tells you the golden rule of scribes. Never write faster than you think. But never think so long they believe you're plotting. Hard advice to follow. Still relevant too. You linger a little longer sipping tea, letting the silence soak in. The room feels thick with memory. Every tablet a whisper from someone who had to follow the rules just to earn the chance to write them. Eventually you stand. Ibby hands you a small clay shard inscribed with the phrase, "The stylus is light. The gaze is heavier." A reminder, he says. You bow, not too low, not too stiff, just the polite bend. He smiles. Outside, the city has darkened. Torches flicker behind curtains. You pass a street musician humming into a clay flute. A girl sells sesame cakes from a cart, her voice barely above a whisper. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks 3 times, then stops as if it remembered something and got distracted. You hold the shard in your palm, its warmth fading, its message lingering. Because in Babylon, rules weren't just rules. They were choreography. A dance of glances, gestures, deference. And those who mastered it didn't just survive. They wrote history. The shard still rests in your hand as you wander through the dimming streets, the clay warm from your palm and cooler night air starting to pull gently at your sleeves. You're headed now to the riverfront, not for trade or bathing, but for gossip. Specifically, the rules around it. Because in Babylon, gossip isn't just idle chatter. It's a practiced art. A game of veiled insults, cautious flattery, and the kind of strategic eavesdropping that would make modern spy agencies proud. You turn a corner and descend toward the Euphrates, where the wide river cuts through the city like a silver vein. The banks are alive with soft activity merchants packing up couples walking, close clusters of neighbors perched on benches made from old stones and sandalwood planks. You join one such cluster hovering at the edge like a moth circling firelight. No one minds. That's how these riverfront circles work, fluid open with conversation, drifting in the way smoke curls from incense, directionless yet unmistakably designed. A woman in russet robes is in mid-sentence. And then she said the grain scales must have been rigged because there's no way her shipment was short. Polite laughter. Someone clicks their tongue. Someone else sighs knowingly. But didn't her cousin marry that tax clerk, a younger man asks, pretending to look bored while listening like his life depends on it? Exactly, the woman replies, eyes narrowing like a cat, eyeing a sandal. This you realize is Babylonian diplomacy. Not war councils or Senate debates, but gossip disguised as civic duty. A social radar carefully attuned to hierarchy and honor. Because in Babylon, speaking plainly is dangerous. There are words for direct accusations, they're used in court. But in alleys and market stalls, people prefer implication. Historians still argue whether this preference for indirect speech came from a love of subtlety or simple self-preservation. Maybe both. After all, Babylon was a city with ears everywhere, human and divine. You listen more. A potter's apprentice tells a story about a priest who supposedly fell asleep during morning prayers and muttered his wife's name instead of the gods. No one dares laugh too loudly, but the glances exchanged are enough to ignite a dozen unspoken narratives. Another man leans forward, speaking just loud enough for his words to drift into neighboring ears. I heard the fishmonger's son has been sneaking saffron into his bundles, inflating the price. Not much, just enough to make it clever. Might be smart, someone replies, voice lazy, or might be cursed. And that's the trick of Babylonian gossip. It never says enough to get you in trouble, but always enough to plant a seed. You join the circle offering nothing but a smile and a soft evening. They nod, and just like that, you're part of the current. As the conversation loops again, this time to the scandal of a broken engagement blamed on improperly fermented beer, you catch on to the rhythms. Statements in threes, pauses before jokes, fake humility paired with dramatic tone shifts. It's almost musical. And then someone speaks about you. Not by name, of course. Did you hear about the one asking questions about turnips? Your ears prick. Said to be wandering from clerk to cook, from sage to servant, gathering roots like they're royal secrets. A chuckle. Must be writing a poem. Or a curse, someone adds. You consider denying it, but that would be too forward. So instead you smirk and say nothing. Which in Babylon is the same as saying everything. There's a rule here, unwritten but firm. Never clarify what someone else is willing to assume for you. Let them build the myth. It saves you the work. As the river breeze cools the circle, you notice a small offering shrine, tucked behind a cluster of reeds. It's humble, a clay dish with dried figs and 2 worn beads, but it carries meaning. One woman catches your gaze. That's for Nanaya, she whispers. Goddess of love and secrets. You nod, not asking what she prefers. Because Babylonian deities, much like its citizens, love nuance. In fact, some gods were rumored to favor the clever over the good. Marduk might grant favor to a farmer who padded his ledgers just right, while Inanna was said to bless those who lied well in court if the lie served beauty or justice, depending on her mood. You ask the group what the worst gossip they've ever heard was. Silence. Then a man with a scar across his cheek leans forward. I once heard that a man replaced his wife's dowry tablets with fake ones. Said the clay was from Kish, but it was just old river silt. She found out on their 3rd anniversary. What happened, you ask? A pause. He now sells sandals to ghosts. In the shade. No one laughs. That means it's probably true. And that's another social rule here. Humor has levels. Some jokes are to make the gods laugh. Others are to keep devils away. And some, the sharpest, are told without ever raising a smile. The scarred man turns to you. What about you? He asks. What do you think turnips are for? It's a trap, of course. Everything here is. But you answer honestly. Truth, maybe. Hidden truth. He nods. Wrong, but you said it well. That counts for something. You take your leave as the circle begins to scatter. Backlit by torchlight, their shadows move like stories preparing to spread. You walk the edge of the river, the water whispering nonsense and wisdom alike. Babylon doesn't need newspapers. It has voices. And the voices have rules. Not about what's said, but about what's left unsaid. And you're starting to understand the rhythm. You leave the riverfront just as the last bursts of laughter drift into the evening air, the silhouettes of gossipers melting into torchlight and damp mist. The streets are cooler now, the warmth of day giving way to a calm stillness like the city itself is exhaling. But your destination lies just ahead down a winding street through a carved stone gate and past a statue of a lion that has long since lost its nose. You're headed to a dinner party. And not just any dinner party, a Babylonian upper-class gathering the kind you can only attend if you're born with status. Marry into it. Or in your case, somehow talk your way into an invite under the guise of being a chronicler of root-based cultural norms. A title you made up. But that's the beauty of Babylon. If you say something with confidence and the right number of syllables, no one questions it. The courtyard where the party is held glows with the soft orange light of oil lamps, their reflections dancing on low fountains. Attendants move gracefully between guests, balancing platters of honeyed dates, roasted lamb, and thin rolls of flatbread, seasoned with sesame and crushed coriander. And yes, bowls of spiced turnip mash, garnished with mint leaves and swirls of yogurt. The ever-present root makes its cameo once again. You step into the garden greeted with nods and raised eyebrows. Guests recline on low cushions arranged in semicircles, dressed in dyed linens and gold-threaded sashes. The conversation is light at first, trading pleasantries, praising the cook making passive-aggressive compliments about each other's sandals. But soon the real game begins. Because Babylonian dinner parties weren't just for food, they were for power, for performance, and for navigating the intricate maze of unspoken rules that determined who was favored and who was quietly forgotten. One woman draped in saffron and wearing earrings shaped like crescent moons speaks with subtle flair. I do hope she says sipping wine from a bronze cup, that the city remembers to honor the farmers this year. After all, it's easy to forget the hand that feeds you when it's dirt covered. Another guest, a lean man with a permanently arched eyebrow, smiles. And yet the priests seem to have such clean hands. A ripple of laughter, polite pointed. This is Babylonian wit. Gentle on the surface, sharp as obsidian beneath. You're offered a cup of barley beer, thick, warm, fermented with date residue. It tastes like ambition and questionable decisions. You accept another sip. Across the courtyard, a man begins a story about the king's astrologer, misreading a comet, and accidentally declaring a goat blessed by the stars. The goat apparently is now housed in a temple and receives offerings twice a week. Historians still argue someone says eyes twinkling whether the goat was truly blessed or just very persuasive. The evening flows. A servant appears with a tray of spiced fish and flatbread shaped like cuneiform tablets. Conversation swells again, this time turning to law. Babylon's legal system, you discover, is a dinner table favorite. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a story. One guest, reclining dramatically across two cushions, recounts how her neighbor's ox trampled a melon patch and was sentenced to wear a bell of shame for a full moon cycle. Better the ox than the owner, someone quips. Depends on who owns the bell, another replies. You smile, tucking this all away. Because here law isn't just about rules, it's performance. And like every part of Babylonian society, it's riddled with social nuance. Take, for example, the practice of public restitution. If you wrong someone and it's discovered, you might be fined. Sure, but more importantly, you'll be expected to make a public gesture. Gift them wine. Kneel. Or in one famous case, compose a poem about how great they are and recite it outside their house 3 mornings in a row. Better than prison, someone says. Worse if your poetry's bad, another replies. The topic shifts again now to omens. One man swears he saw a snake slither across the threshold of his bakery, and now his bread won't rise properly. It's the yeast, someone suggests. No, he insists. It's the snake. Omens are everywhere in Babylon. Birds flying in the wrong direction, oil forming the wrong pattern on water, a dog barking at the moon. Any of these could mean war famine, or just that your next date will go terribly. One guest leans toward you. You know there's a tablet somewhere that says, if a man dreams of turnips, he will be favored in love, but unlucky in litigation. You raise an eyebrow, a strange trade-off. They usually are, she replies, sipping her beer. You glance down at your plate. The turnip mash is nearly gone, the mint now wilted at the edge. A small boy, probably the son of the host, tiptoes past holding a tiny clay lamp. He's humming tunelessly, but the sound fits the moment. You remember one of the unwritten rules of Babylonian society: never outshine your host, but always appear clever enough that your presence adds value to the room. It's exhausting, it's elegant, it's Babylon. As the night deepens, someone brings out a lyre. Not for music necessarily, more to anchor the mood like a living piece of furniture. A woman begins reciting a love poem, her voice lilting and slow, her hands gesturing with every verse. The poem is about a man who offers his beloved not jewels or honey, but a perfectly grown root unblemished, pulled from his family's oldest field. Everyone listens, and you, half drunk and fully fascinated, feel the turnip earn its place once again, not just as food or metaphor, but as cultural currency. The final verse ends with, he gave me earth and asked for nothing. I gave him shade. Silence follows, then a murmur of approval. You recline a little further into your cushion, the weight of the evening pressing gently into your limbs. The stars above are bright now, unbothered by smoke or cloud, and the city hums around you with life, legacy, and layered meaning. Someone leans in and says softly, you've been watching. But soon they'll start watching you. You nod, not quite sure what they mean. But in Babylon, mystery is always part of the meal. You leave the dinner party with a slight buzz in your limbs and the peculiar aftertaste of barley beer and roasted roots still clinging to your tongue. The streets have grown quieter now, save for the occasional bark of a night dog or the metallic creak of a city gate adjusting to the wind. Babylon sleeps lightly, if at all. There's always someone whispering, writing, or sweeping dust. That will be back tomorrow. Tonight, your path winds toward the edge of the artisan quarter. You're seeking a particular home, a modest building with a tiled courtyard nestled between a potter's shop and a spice vendor who is rumored to sell dream powder that smells suspiciously like crushed lavender and onion peel. You've come to meet a woman named Ishtar Sin. Not the goddess, obviously, but a namesake with enough stubborn confidence to make you believe otherwise. She's a midwife healer, and when the mood strikes, Babylon's most brutally honest commentator on how women are expected to behave in this labyrinth of rules and rituals. She greets you at the gate in a russet tunic, hair tied back with braided linen strips and arms dusted with flour from some forgotten kitchen task. Without a word, she leads you inside, pours you a clay cup of herb-steeped water, and nods for you to sit. You want to know how it worked for us, she says, not asking. You nod. So she begins. In Babylon, she explains there were rules for everything, but the ones for women were written in ink you couldn't always see. They shifted depending on who you married, where you lived, how many children you had, and how many gods your father claimed to worship. She speaks plainly with that kind of casual fire earned by watching too much nonsense pass for law. Take marriage. She continues gesturing with her cup. It wasn't just a ceremony, it was a contract, a deal, a ledger entry. You got a clay tablet with your name, your dowry, and your husband's promises etched in wedge-shaped truth. And if things went wrong, well, she says if your husband was cruel, you could go back to your father's house, but only if the contract allowed. If he accused you of witchcraft, they'd throw you in the river to see if the gods liked you. You blink. And if you floated, she shrugs. You were innocent, also usually dead. You sip your tea slowly. But it wasn't all bad, she adds. There were protections, too. If a man left his wife without cause, he could be fined or publicly shamed. Women could own property, run taverns, even lend money so long as they had a male guardian to co-sign the contracts. It's a system built for men, she says, but with enough cracks for clever women to grow in. And cleverness, it seems, was its own currency. She tells you stories, some likely true, others improved, with retelling about women who manipulated inheritance laws with strategic pregnancies, or bartered healing herbs in exchange for silence when the temple priest came asking questions. One tale stands out. A woman named Tamu had a husband who spent more time with his goats than his family. She rewrote their marriage contract to include a clause any man who abandoned his wife for 3 nights in a row would owe her a silver ring. By the end of the year, she had a dozen. Historians still argue whether that clause was legal, Ishtarsin says, but her jewelry box didn't seem to care. The conversation turns naturally to childbirth. You ask her what it's like, what the rules were, then how they guided such intimate, powerful moments. There were rituals, she explains. One before the birth to ask the gods for mercy. One after to thank them or blame them, depending on how it went. She chuckles softly. There was a midwife's oath, never written, only spoken. And prayers to Gula, the goddess of healing, whispered under breath while grinding herbs or tying the birth cord. Everything mattered. The moon, the wind, the mood of the cat. You ask if men were ever allowed in the room. She laughs loud at that. If they tried, we handed them a basin and told them to scrub. Most ran. She leans forward now, her eyes glinting in the lamplight. But the strangest part wasn't the pain or the rules or even the gods. It was the silence after. The moment when everything stopped just for a breath, and the world felt like it had rewound itself. Like Babylon was waiting to see if the child would cry. And when it did, then we knew we had another life to teach the rules to. There's a long pause. Just the sound of night frogs chirping in some distant canal. You realize then how many layers exist beneath the grand facades of temples and courts. That the laws and rituals are real, yes, but what gives them life, meaning, resilience? Are women like Ishtarsin, who follow the rules, bend them, rewrite them, and sometimes laugh in their face. Before you leave, she presses something into your hand. It's a charm, a small disc of baked clay with a crudely etched image of a woman holding a turnip. For fertility, she says with a wink. Or indigestion. Depends on your attitude. You promise to keep it safe. As you walk back into the cooling night, the charm warm in your palm, you pass a group of young girls playing a clapping game in the street. Their rhythm is hypnotic. Their voices sing. If the moon is high and the water is low, tie your scarf and walk home slow. If the cat meows and the door won't close, count your roots and cover your toes. You don't know what it means. But it sticks with you, just like everything else tonight. You wake before dawn tucked into your reed mat with a thin sheet tangled around your ankles, and that faint lingering sense that you've just dreamed something important, but now it's gone. The clay charm Ishtar scene gave you rest on the floor by your head. You pick it up. The little figure on it seems to smirk, or maybe that's just the angle. Outside, Babylon hasn't quite begun humming again. There's a pause in the air, like the city is holding its breath before the day's long exhale. You splash some water on your face, and decide that today is for the markets. Not the grand marketplaces you've passed before with their linen awnings and jostling elbows. Today, you're going underground figuratively, though quite literally, if you count the alley ramps and low-slung shade canopies. There's a specific quarter near the river where the rules loosen and the stalls shift daily. Where, if you ask nicely and offer coin with 2 fingers instead of 1, you might just find something old, strange, or possibly cursed. Naturally, that's where you're headed. The streets gradually fill as you walk. Merchants setting up their scales. A boy chasing 2 squawking hens into a doorway. Somewhere a man is already drunk enough to sing about the glories of grain while balancing a jar on his head. But beneath this surface clatter lies a web of etiquette, spoken and unspoken. And that's what you're really here for today. Babylon's marketplace manners. The strange choreography of bartering, boasting, and behaving correctly when everyone's watching, but pretending not to. You step into the first stall's shadow and are immediately greeted by a woman with 6 bracelets and 1 eyebrow. You buying or looking? She asks, already unwrapping a bundle of figs. You reply carefully that you're just browsing for now. She grunts, then stay out of my sun. So much for soft landings. In Babylon, haggling isn't just expected. It's necessary. Prices are suggestions. The real transaction is in the tone, the rhythm, the way you pretend to walk away at just the right dramatic moment. And, oh, the rules. Not the written kind, those wouldn't survive a morning in this place. No, these are the rules passed down through raised eyebrows and whispered scoldings. You learn fast or pay double. You try it at the next stall. A jar of honeyed dates. You compliment the vendor's beard, this is a known tactic. Then declare the price ridiculous, then soften and ask if perhaps the dates are blessed by Shamash himself, since they're clearly made of sunlight. He laughs. You're in. Eventually, you walk away with half a jar for half the asking price and the vendor's blessing for good digestion. Success. Historians still argue whether the Babylonian marketplace was more a hub of commerce or community theater. It's hard to tell the difference. Performers, beggars, scammers, scribes, fortune tellers all press in at the edges. You pass a man with an oil-slicked head holding a sign that reads, "Curse removal reasonable rates." You don't ask. You do, however, stop when you spot something familiar, a pile of slightly wilted, slightly misshapen turnips. You're drawn in, of course, the vendor, an old man missing several teeth and most of his patience, eyes you as you pick one up. You know what that is? He says flatly. You nod. Then buy it or leave it. Staring won't make it prettier. You buy too because you like his honesty. He nods in approval, then tells you something strange. These came down river, traded in a crate of dye from Tyre. Woman said they'd been carved with protection symbols, then boiled. Said it worked, too, kept her husband from gambling for a week. You peer closer. The roots are scarred with faint, deliberate lines. Not writing exactly, more like glyphs. One looks like a pair of closed eyes, another like a stylized flame. You ask if he believes in it. He shrugs. I believe in selling them. A fair stance. Your next stop is the dye quarter where things get vibrant. Clay jars of pigment line the path, crushed lapis, crushed beetle shells, chunks of dried indigo. You pass a group of children daring each other to stick their fingers into a vat of oxblood dye. One does. His mother screams from a window. It's here that you overhear something strange. Two weavers deep in debate arguing not about thread or pricing, but about color taboos. I'm telling you, one says, pointing with a stained fingernail, you can't wear that shade of yellow to a moon festival. It calls bad spirits. The other snorts. Only if the threads were dyed on a Tuesday. You pause pretending to examine a bolt of fabric while listening more. It turns out Babylon has a quiet undercurrent of chromatic superstitions, deeply regional, rarely documented. Saffron for fertility unless it's cloudy. Teal for protection during childbirth, but only if worn with silver. Indigo banned from funerals in some wards, encouraged in others. Historians still argue whether these were consistent enough to be considered rules or just an excuse to sell more fabric. But there's a logic to it, you realize. Color in a place so full of gods and signs couldn't possibly be neutral. You move on this time toward a square where the apprentices gather young, cocky, and freshly oiled with ambition. They trade gossip dice and stories of customers too rich to know better. One boy tells of a woman who demanded a potion to make her husband less annoying. The vendor gave her fennel water and a lecture on patience. She paid double. As you head back through the winding alleys, your satchel, heavier with roots cloth scraps and a small wooden spoon you didn't mean to buy. You realize something. All these rules, the eyebrow flicks, the dye taboos, the food superstitions, they aren't just quirks. They're how a city this big, this loud holds itself together. They're how people move through the chaos with just enough shared understanding to not bump into each other too hard. You round a final corner and nearly trip over a child drawing in the dust. She's made a sun with a turnip inside it and labeled it phonetically God food. You chuckle and step around it, because honestly, she might not be wrong. By the time you return to your lodgings, the light has turned that burnished honey gold again. Babylon in the late afternoon is a bit like a cat, warm, languid, and entirely capable of sudden violence if you startle it. But right now, it's content. Market stalls are folding away like flowers at dusk. Sandals scrape lazily on the streets, and from somewhere nearby, someone is grinding grain with rhythmic determination. You pass a corner where yesterday's chalk drawing still clings faintly to the mud brick. The sun turnip child scrawl is fading, but you still recognize the shape. You smile. Inside, you spread your purchases on a low bench. 2 carved turnips with faint symbols, a length of saffron-dyed ribbon that still smells vaguely of goat, and that spoon you still can't explain. You don't sit yet. You still have one more appointment, because tonight you're visiting a woman named Belili Babylon's closest thing to a professional etiquette consultant. She lives near the edge of the city, past the barley presses and fishmongers, in a house that smells of almond paste and authority. Everyone who's anyone, you're told, has consulted her at least once, especially before banquets, funerals, or anything involving 3 or more scribes and a religious official. You knock. The door opens before your fist lands twice. She's short, draped in indigo and opinion, and immediately points to your sandals. Wipe those, she says. My threshold is cleaner than half the palace kitchens. You comply. Inside her home is dim but carefully arranged. Bowls of dried herbs line the walls along with painted tiles bearing scenes of very stressed-looking banquets. One features a man being escorted out by two others clutching a wine jug and wearing nothing but embarrassment. That's my cousin, she says with no elaboration. She waves you to a cushion and begins without prompting. You want to understand Babylonian etiquette, she says? Good. Start with this: we are a city of proximity. Not just physical, but social. Everyone is watching. No one admits it. She explains that greetings here aren't just for show. The number of syllables matters. The direction of your head tilt matters. Whether you compliment someone's household gods or their hair, first depends on social rank moon phase and whether they're holding a cup. Historians still argue, she says dryly, if any of it worked. But it made us feel civilized. She pauses to light a lamp with a twist of linen wick and a lump of fragrant oil. There's an art to being just respectful enough. Too formal and you're mocking. Too casual and you're an idiot. People in Babylon don't want honesty, they want choreography. You nod slowly. Exactly, she says. You're getting it. She pulls out a set of clay tokens, miniature figures, each with exaggerated gestures. One bows deeply. Another holds a jug at a precise angle. A third has hands clasped in an unnecessarily dramatic pose. These are for training children, she explains. I also use them on husbands. You chuckle. She doesn't. She gestures to the first figure. That's the grief stance. Elbows and head lowered, hands palm up. Appropriate for condolences, temple offerings, and apologizing to in-laws. The next is the wedding bow, the feast lean, the market nod. There's even a small token of a man sneezing mid-apology. You ask if people really followed all these cues. Oh no, she says. But everyone pretended they knew them. That's the point. Social shame is the mortar that holds our bricks. She moves to a shelf and produces a scroll. These, she says, are the 7 behaviors of proper Babylonian dining. You raise an eyebrow. There's a list. There are many lists, she corrects. This one happens to be mine. She unrolls it carefully. Never speak before the host eats unless you are a priest or a jester. Do not salt your food until the second bite. Laugh only with teeth hidden open. Laughter invites demons. Use your left hand for wine, right for bread, unless reversed at funerals. Never name the gods while chewing. Compliment the cook with metaphor, not fact. Always bring a gift even if it's small, especially if it's strange. Number 6, she says, tapping the parchment is essential. Say, this stew reminds me of warm rain after victory. Not, this is spicy. You ask about the last one. Because strange gifts are remembered. And that's the real game, being remembered without being resented. She leans back with a satisfied sigh and sips from a cup of what smells like anise and melted resolve. You think about the turnip-shaped token in your bag. You wonder where that falls on the gift spectrum. Weird, yes. Memorable, definitely. Before you leave, she offers you a parting favor. A phrase of blessing reserved for those entering new circles. May your shadow cool the clay, she says. It means may your presence be useful without leaving a stain. You repeat it under your breath as you walk home. The sky is deepening to a velvet purple stars poking through like cautious witnesses. A man passes you carrying a loaf the size of his torso. A woman nearby adjusts her veil and sneezes so loudly you feel it in your chest. And you begin to see it everywhere now, the choreography Balili described. The way a child hands a coin to a vendor with 2 fingers, the precise way a man steps aside for someone older. The subtle flick of a wrist that means thanks but no thanks when offered a second helping. None of it's in the laws, but all of it matters. You arrive home to find the air cooler, the oil lamp low, the night ready to fold you in. And as you lie down replaying the day, the etiquette tokens dancing behind your eyelids, you realize something. Babylon didn't need strict laws for every gesture. It had expectations. And that was enough to turn soup into ceremony, laughter into risk, and a simple nod into a sacred rite. You sleep light that night. Half dreams of bowing turnips, whispering scrolls, and someone loudly correcting your table posture in Sumerian. By the time morning breaks over Babylon's baked rooftops, you're already up and moving, still wrapped in the comfortable disorientation of cultural overload. Today you're headed for something a little more grounded, quite literally. Because if Babylonian etiquette thrives in upper-class dining rooms and scholarly debates, it also bubbles up stubbornly richly from the lower layers of society. You're going to the washer's courtyard. Not a glamorous place, but a necessary one. The laundry courtyard sits near the city's eastern edge, just past the fish cellars and the barley mash vats. The smell hits you first, a ripe blend of soap river water, and something you choose not to identify. Then come the sound slaps of linen against stone, the gurgle of water being lifted in clay pots, the mutter of gossip that's already halfway to legend. This is where Babylon's working class does its most important social maneuvering while pretending to mind their own tunics. And here too, social rules weave their way between the threads. You're met by a woman named Sarpanit. She's lean, sun-worn, with forearms like woven rope and a laugh that could shatter amphorae. You're the visitor who wants to talk dirt. She grins, waving you in. Good, we've got plenty. You follow her past baskets of damp clothes sorted by fabric rank and how likely they are to bleed dye onto their neighbors. She motions to a smooth, flat stone. Sit, she says, and if you brought silk, we're not responsible for shrinkage. You explain your purpose trying to sound academic without sounding condescending. She listens, nods, then says, well, just remember, even the king's tunic ends up here. She's not wrong. As the morning sun climbs, workers drift in and out. Some scrubbing, some wringing, others just sitting their hands and tongues equally busy. You notice how people organize themselves. Elders get the shady spots, new arrivals take the splash zone, and anyone who's caught spreading false rumors gets assigned to the sandals. This is more than a washing pit, it's a theater, a courtroom, a gossip archive, and social scoreboard. And yes, there are rules. Unwritten, of course, but firm. For example, never wring cloth facing someone else. It's considered aggressive. Offer someone your soap and you're signaling apology. Accidentally tangle your linen with someone else's. That's either a flirtation or an insult depending on your eyebrow. Historians still argue Sarpanit says scrubbing a tunic with unnecessary enthusiasm. Whether laundry customs evolved from temple rites or if people just hate wet surprises. She offers you a turn at the stones. You try and immediately splash water across your own lap. Blessings upon your first stain, she teases. May it be the worst of the day. A younger girl no older than 10 begins humming an old work song. The rhythm catches others join, and soon the courtyard is pulsing with the gentle thump of cloth, the sigh of water, and that haunting melody. You catch the lyrics. If your tunic is torn, stitch your heart too. If your belt is tight, speak sweet words. If your soap runs dry, borrow forgiveness. It's simple, but oddly profound. You ask Sarpanit if she knows where it came from. Probably a priestess, she says, or a mother, which is the same thing most days. The sun creeps higher. The pots of rinse water steam faintly now. Chickens dart in and out of the shadows, stealing lint like prized treasure. A toddler waddles by with a sandal in her mouth. No one seems concerned. And as the day unfolds, you notice how etiquette and utility blur here. There's a proper way to offer clothespins upright, not sideways. There's a correct distance to sit from a stranger's wash pile 2 hands unless you're related. Eye contact is brief unless it's someone you're hoping to marry or sue. You lean over to Sarpanit, so if I wring cloth like this, you demonstrate badly. Am I insulting you or inviting tea? Both, she says. Depends on the season. She's teasing, probably. As midday heat thickens, the air lunch arrives in the form of a passing vendor. Flatbread pickled onion and small turnip cakes fried in oil that's clearly seen things. You buy 2, offer 1 to Sarpanit. She accepts with a nod. You're learning, she says. And then quietly, it's not about the soap or the water. It's about presence. Washing clothes is just the excuse we've kept since the flood. She gestures around. Everyone brings their mess. We make it manageable together. You sit with that for a while. Chew slowly. Let the turnip linger. Before you leave, she gives you a square of woven linen, a dyed rust red and folded with care. A token, she says, not clean but honest. You accept it like a gift of gold. As you walk back through the now bright city, you realize how much of Babylon's etiquette isn't about hierarchy or performance, it's about rhythm. Shared patterns, unspoken trust. You pass a couple arguing softly about fish prices. 2 elders playing a game that involves yelling and small stones and a man adjusting his turban 3 times before stepping into the street. All choreography. All intentional. You head toward the gardens, linen tucked under your arm, the smell of soap still in your skin. And for once you feel like you belong. Just a little. You drift from the washer's courtyard with damp cuffs and a quiet sense of earned inclusion, winding your way through the maze of market stalls and alleyways past homes that lean like tired shoulders into the greener edges of the city toward the gardens. Not the royal gardens with their manicured symmetry and bored peacocks, but something a little rougher. A little more honest. This is the Garden of Inanna. It isn't marked with statues or columns. There's no grand entrance or bronze dedication. Just a clay path veering off from the street and a gate made of twisted reeds and stubborn rope. But step inside and you're in another world. The air changes here. Cooler. Rich with damp soil and jasmine. The buzz of insects replaces the clang of city life. You exhale without realizing you've been holding your breath. And here among rows of chickpeas and date palms and a trellis groaning under the weight of gourds you meet Enlil. Not the god, the gardener. Although honestly the resemblance is there. He's old. Ageless, really. His skin is a shade darker than the dirt he moves with bare hands. His beard could hide a small sparrow. And he speaks like each word is weighed before release. You came for the rules, he says, not bothering with hello. They grow here too. He hands you a clay cup filled with something green and vaguely bitter. You drink, because somehow not drinking seems disrespectful. You follow him through the rows. This garden, he says, was sacred once. Not in the temple way, in the real way. Where things grow, so do rules. Nature is etiquette. You nod slowly, like cause and effect. He shakes his head. Like interdependence. You don't trample sprouts. You don't steal figs. You don't insult the basil. That last one might be a joke. Or maybe not. He pauses beside a shallow trench lined with river stones. Water trickles through lazy and cool. Historians still argue he murmurs whether gardens in ancient Babylon were communal gifts or quiet forms of resistance. I say they were both. He shows you a patch of turnips. Of course there are turnips. You no longer question this. They're good listeners, he says. That's why we plant them near the storytelling bench. You raise an eyebrow. He smiles. Plants have moods too. You'd be surprised what they absorb. He takes you to a shaded alcove formed by hanging grapevines, where 3 elders sit, playing a slow game with pebbles and snide commentary. They nod at you barely. You're new. The plants vouch for you, but still, etiquette demands time. Enlil gestures to a stool carved from cedar. Sit with stillness, he says. That's the rule here. So you do. And slowly the garden unfolds. A child gathers mint with deliberate reverence. A woman in russet robes whispers to a fig tree before plucking its fruit. A man sings softly while rearranging melon vines, the melody laced with apology and promise. No one rushes. Nothing is wasted. Even the compost pile feels sacred, layered with ash and offering. You begin to notice more how paths curve to protect the weak plants from wind. How certain benches are always left empty, reserved for spirits or shy guests or perhaps memory itself. This Enlil says is a place of balance. Every act here, planting, weeding, harvesting, is a conversation, a negotiation. He shows you a carved sign tucked in the dirt near the entrance. 5 lines weather-worn but still legible. Step lightly, speak softly. Offer water. Thank the root. Leave more than you take. That's it. The whole garden law. No guards, no punishment, just expectation. And it works. People forget he says that etiquette isn't control, it's continuity. He kneels, brushes dirt from a gourd leaf, then adds, "We think we're making rules, but mostly we're remembering them." The sun shifts, casting golden stripes through the canopy. Someone lights incense near the herb beds. A cat stretches luxuriously beneath a rosemary bush, clearly superior to all nearby humans. You exhale. There's a peace here, not the absence of noise, but the presence of care. And it strikes you how much this reflects Babylon itself. Not the city of kings and conquest, but the city of layers and labor of small rituals, quietly keeping the center from crumbling. You ask Enlil if anyone's ever written these garden rules down. He shakes his head. They're not for tablets, he says. They're for touch, for memory, for the soles of your feet. You walk the garden again, this time barefoot. The path is warm, textured. Every stone placed with intention. Every patch of shade earned. Before you leave, Enlil hands you a satchel of dried herbs, thyme, sage, and something untranslatable. For remembering, he says. You nod. And the turnips? He chuckles. For soup. Even memory gets hungry. You laugh together. Then you step out of the gate and back into the city. But something stays with you. A slowness, a softness, a sense that beneath all your learning, all your questions, you're starting to understand what Babylonian etiquette truly means. It's not about rules carved in clay or gestures set in stone. It's about presence, respect, and rhythm, like a garden, like a game, like a quiet word offered to the wind. You leave the garden slower than you entered it, your steps unconsciously adjusted to the pace of still vines and gently murmuring soil. Babylon feels different now. The noise of the city hasn't changed, it's still clanging bronze and hawked cabbages and somewhere always a goat that sounds vaguely like an insult, but your ears have. You hear it all a little softer, and you're ready for something quieter still. So you follow a tip whispered by a melon vendor with missing teeth and impeccable manners. If you want to learn the real rules, go to the scribes. Not the ones in the palace, the ones near the river. He points vaguely southeast. You shrug. Sounds about right. You wander until the paths turn to gravel, and the buildings lean a little older. The air smells like parchment-baked dates and ink that's never quite dry. And eventually, there it is, a squat mud brick building with a crooked lintel and a faded blue symbol of Nabu, the god of wisdom and writing, painted over the door. Inside, it's dim and dry. So dry, in fact, that your lips crack, just looking at the scrolls. Clay tablets line the shelves like bricks. Reed pens hang from strings. And the only sound is the scratching of styluses on wax and the occasional mutter of someone realizing they've just spelled barley as barely. A scribe in indigo robes looks up. Studying trade law, he asks. You shake your head. Etiquette. He blinks once, twice, then nods like this explains everything. You'll want the table in the back. Under domestic behavior and related disputes. That is somehow both hilarious and deeply serious. You find the section. It's not as dusty as you'd expect. In fact, it's a little too neat, tabs marked with bits of wool, certain tablets grouped with colored cords. Someone has been curating this. Obsessively. You pull a tablet at random. It's titled simply Proper Conduct of Guests. The list is long. Don't arrive early. Don't insult the cupbearer. Don't place your sandals on the host threshold. Don't ask if the lentils are fresh. Don't bring your own beer unless invited. The tone is somewhere between motherly warning and petty grievance, and yet absolutely practical. Another tablet contains responses from hosts. Don't water down the wine. Don't brag about your goat. Don't comment on the guest's sandals unless they sparkle. You laugh. So does the scribe now standing behind you. Etiquette was creative, he offers, and contradictory. There's a scroll that says never eat before your host, and another that insists you show your gratitude by eating first so they don't have to break the fast in public. You ask how people kept up. He raises his eyebrows. They didn't. He leads you to a smaller alcove. A tablet sits under glass, faded, chipped, and beloved. This, he says reverently, is the banquet of Utnapishtim, a parody. You lean in. The opening line reads, On the day of feasting, Utnapishtim brought his elbow to the table and all the gods gasped. You read more. Apparently, this ancient satire follows a character so ignorant of decorum that he wipes his mouth with a temple scroll, mistakes the hostess's dog for a cushion, and toasts the room with someone else's wine. He becomes a folk villain, the scribe explains. Still used in metaphors. If you slurp your broth, you're eating like Utnapishtim. It's oddly comforting to know even 4,000 years ago people were writing sitcoms about awkward dinner guests. You sit and study a few more records. One outlines rules for greetings based on status and time of day. Another advises on seating arrangements, elders near the fire, children near the fig bowl, guests by the shadows so they do not melt. Melt? Poetic license, the scribe says, or a reference to those uncomfortable chairs made of sun-baked clay. Historians still argue whether these etiquette tablets were enforced or aspirational. Did people truly abide by the rule that no guest should speak during the serving of lentils? Or was it just wishful thinking from weary hosts? Your favorite entry is etched by a different hand, rough and slanted. If your neighbor brings too much perfume to dinner, say nothing. Let the flies punish him. You smile. Etiquette wasn't just rules, it was revenge in slow motion. Before you leave, the scribe hands you a clay slip marked with a single word. Silence. A reminder, he says, that sometimes not speaking is the most respectful act of all. You nod, because in this hall of words, silence suddenly feels sacred. Outside, the heat presses on you like a thick woolen shawl, but your thoughts are cool parchment and dusty laughter. You wander back toward the heart of the city, now looking at it all differently. Every doorway has a threshold you should never stand in. Every market exchange is a dance. Every shared bowl a treaty. You pause at a food stall where a boy offers you a sticky date with both hands. He doesn't speak, just bows slightly. You do the same. And the exchange feels older than the city. Older than words. Just presence. Offered. Accepted. You bite into the sticky date, letting the honeyed fruit fill your mouth with warmth and something almost floral like memory sweetened with time. Around you, the midday pulse of Babylon beats on. It's a loud city, but not chaotic. Everyone seems to know exactly how far to lean into a conversation, how many figs to offer in trade, which gestures count as thank you, and which mean don't push your luck. And now you can almost read it. There's a rhythm beneath the ruckus, a choreography. Today's next step, a visit to the weavers. You've passed their quarter before the clack of looms echoing out from courtyards, bundles of dyed wool hanging from terraces like plump, lazy parrots. But what you didn't realize until now was how tightly social rules were woven literally into the garments themselves. A merchant at the edge of the district offers to walk with you. He smells faintly of cardamom and dust, and his robes are patterned with embroidered spirals. Family Marquis says so I can be found if I faint from the heat. You chuckle, but he's only half joking. He explains that in Babylon, clothing isn't just status, it's etiquette made visible. Who you are, where you're from, how you're feeling, whether you expect visitors. All of it can be read in the fabric. A striped hem means widowed. A sash with 3 knots means engaged in business, do not interrupt. A linen tunic frayed at the sleeves signals mourning, especially if worn with uncombed hair. It's not just about modesty or flashiness, it's communication. A textile language. You pass a cluster of women dyeing wool in deep indigo and dusty rose. One is stirring a pot with a stick nearly as tall as she is, and she's singing a song that sounds suspiciously like a complaint about her sister-in-law's cooking. The merchant nods. That's the song of spoiled lentils. Very popular. Further down the lane, you spot a row of tunics hanging from a line. Each is marked with a different fringe, some with tiny bells, others with shells, a few with knots you can't decode. The merchant points to a tunic dyed in rust red. That's for mediators. They wear it during disputes, so both sides know to behave. He pauses, then smirks. Doesn't always work. You step into a weaving house where the air is thick with wool dust and the scent of boiling bark. A woman greets you with one raised eyebrow and a thread still clenched between her teeth. She waves you in. You sit on a mat beside the loom, watching her hands move with practiced grace under overpull knot. It's mesmerizing. She tells you between pulls that children are taught textile etiquette before they even learn numbers. Not every family, she adds, but any that hope to marry well. There are rules about gifting fabric never red, before a funeral never green during harvest, always patterned during childbirth. Historians still argue whether color rules were strictly enforced or more symbolic. But everyone agrees on one thing. Gifting someone a plain, undyed tunic was basically saying you have no personality, and also I didn't try. You ask about punishments for violations. Punishment, she laughs. Your neighbor talks about you for a month. That's worse. Apparently, there's a story about a merchant who wore ceremonial robes to a bread market and was mocked so thoroughly he moved to Uruk and became a beekeeper. You glance down at your own outfit. Dusty. Neutral. Probably the Babylonian equivalent of vaguely foreign, possibly lost. You ask the weaver what message you're sending. She eyes you critically, says, I walk too much and my knees crack. Fair enough. She offers to tie a simple wool cord around your wrist, undyed but braided. This means guest, she explains. Temporary, friendly, and not too bright. You laugh. She doesn't. Before you leave, she hands you a scrap of cloth. It's dyed pale blue and stitched with a single loop of red thread. This, she says, was once worn by my grandmother. It means, I remember you. You accept it, carefully folding it into the pouch with the clay token and the wax poem. Your collection grows stranger by the hour. Back on the street, the rhythm of the looms continues behind you. A boy races past carrying a spool of thread bigger than his head. He trips, recovers, and shouts, I meant to do that, as he disappears down the alley. You wander toward a quieter part of the city. By now, you've started to see the unspoken layers of everything. The way a fruit seller arranges his figs not in piles, but in little clusters of 5 and 3. A hint, perhaps, that he believes in lucky numbers. The way a passing noblewoman adjusts her scarf when she sees you twice around the wrist, a common sign of guarded curiosity. And the way 2 elders sit across from each other without speaking, just nodding once, every so often. Not silence acknowledgement. This city is a symphony of unsaid things, and once you learn to listen, it's deafening. You find a bench under a tamarisk tree next to a fountain shaped like a fish that looks perpetually unimpressed. You sit, breathe. Let the weight of wool-draped rules settle into your bones. Everything here means something. Even the quiet. Especially the quiet. A breeze stirs your hair as you sit beside the unimpressed fish fountain, your thoughts tangled like loose thread in the Babylonian air. The cloth band on your wrist feels like a label, now soft, unassuming, but undeniably meaningful. Guest, it says. Friendly. Not too bright, sure, but also curious. Open, willing to learn. And that's exactly what you're doing today. Because as much as Babylon is obsessed with appearances, gestures, food, and fabric, it is equally consumed. Perhaps even ruled by the invisible architecture of hierarchy. This isn't just about wealth or lineage. It's about layers, castes, names. The social ladder here doesn't just go up and down, it winds sideways, diagonally, and sometimes annoyingly in circles. So you start walking. Your destination. A public square near the ziggurat where civic announcements are posted. Marriage arrangements whispered, and if you're lucky, someone's social standing politely dissected over bowls of barley stew. You arrive just as a gathering is forming. A local judge robed in official indigo with a thin silver cord is preparing to deliver a ruling. It's a minor land dispute, but the true spectacle is in how people arrange themselves to watch. Closest to the front merchants with known family names. Next scribes, midwives, and senior artisans. At the edges, farmhands, apprentices, and newcomers. There's a whole shadow language of how far you can stand from the judge before someone huffs at you to move back. You slip in, nodding your thanks when someone scoots over to make room. The speaker begins measured monotone, absolutely unreadable, and the crowd listens with that peculiar Babylonian half-attention present, but preoccupied with decoding the room. A woman beside you mutters he's favoring the northern family. Look at where his sandal points. You glance. It's true his foot is angled subtly toward one party. Not enough for scandal, just enough for implication. It's an entire drama conducted in gestures. When the judgment is handed down, a compromise, as always, the northern party nods graciously, while the southern one bows just slightly too long. A quiet protest. Culturally understood. Socially acceptable. Historians still argue whether this sort of signaling was conscious, or if it evolved naturally. But either way, the effect is undeniable. Everyone knows the score, even when no one says it out loud. You follow the departing crowd toward the ziggurat steps. There, a young priest in training is trying to teach children how to properly address their elders. It's adorable and terrifying. Right hand to chest, then forehead, he says. Then bow. And only speak if they speak to you first. One kid scratches his nose and sneezes into his robe. The priest sighs. Good enough. These rules aren't rigid everywhere. In the marketplace, for instance, things loosen. A little. Reputation counts more than titles there. You spot a famous brewer known citywide for her barley beet concoction, laughing loudly with a weaver's apprentice. Technically, their ranks shouldn't mingle, but success makes exceptions. You edge into a row of shaded stalls and strike up a conversation with a silver merchant named Hadia. She's tall, wiry, and slightly sunburned with fingers that never stop moving. You want to understand social order, she asks, weighing a ring with one hand and tossing dates into her mouth with the other. Forget the king, forget the priests. Watch who owes who a favor. She explains that Babylon's real hierarchy is shaped by debt and gift, not decree. A potter who once fixed a governor's water jug now sits 2 spots higher in the queue during festivals. A woman whose husband served in the palace guards gets free bread from 3 different bakeries. It's not charity, Hadiah insists. It's memory. You think of Lucan and his census scrolls, how even turnips shaped status. Everything here is part of a memory game. One that writes itself into clay fabric, etiquette, and story. Hadiah shows you a pair of earrings. These were once gifted to a scribe's daughter during her coming-of-age ceremony. See the inscription. You squint. A tiny cuneiform mark, a stylized fish. Means spoken for. She was engaged. You ask if she still is. Hadiah shrugs. Not sure, but the fish stayed. So it still speaks. Even jewelry remembers. You leave her stall and wander past a group of young men practicing public speaking near a courtyard wall. They take turns stepping onto a flat stone and delivering short speeches, mostly about taxes or turnips or love. One boy, flushed and stammering, recites a love letter to a girl who may or may not be listening from behind a curtain. Another stands tall and proclaims, "I am not my father's debt nor my brother's shame." A few people clap. He bows twice incorrectly and nearly falls off the rock. Still, he grins like he's just rewritten law. In Babylon, even performance has rules, but bending them, that's where identity forms. You settle on a bench to rest. A group of older women sits nearby peeling garlic and telling stories in a circle. Did you hear what Any Marduk did with his taxes? Only paid half. Then sent the other half in figs. Figs. Smart man. Stubborn man. And then they all laugh. No one here is just one thing. A title. A role. Everyone is layered a daughter and a debtor, a priest and a poet, a baker and a gossip. Social standing is painted in dozens of hues, some permanent, others temporary like dust on sandals. You rise again, your mind buzzing with the invisible architecture of this place. There's power here, but not always where you expect. In a smirk, a pause, a coin given without change. A sandal angled just so. Babylon's rules aren't written in stone. They're danced-worn, whispered. And you're beginning to learn the steps. You wander away from the sun-dappled square, still mulling over the endless dance of glances and gestures, where sandal tilt can outweigh a shouted argument, and earrings hold the memory of engagements long ended. Babylon, you realize, is less like a city and more like a conversation you've walked into, halfway through every pause, loaded every look a footnote. Your next stop, though, is something more tactile. You follow the scent before the signage wood smoke vinegar, something sharp and green. The smell of preservation, of patience, of pickles. Yes, tonight you're heading to one of Babylon's most quietly powerful institutions, the communal preservation kitchens. Tucked behind the rear wall of a public granary, you find the place without trouble. Women bustle about in long saffron and russet aprons, carrying baskets of herbs, piles of clay jars, and bundles of reeds. The air is thick with the steam of boiling brine, and the quiet chorus of recipes being murmured half to memory, half to ritual. You hesitate at the threshold, unsure if you're allowed in. But someone waves you forward. A stout woman with hair wrapped in teal linen hands you a knife and a small bundle of unwashed carrots. You peel, she says without inflection. And listen, that's how we learn. You nod, pulling up a stool. The kitchen is alive in that particular way, shared by all working spaces, where people have too much to do and too much to say. Spoons clatter, stones grind. Someone curses in Sumerian. The smell of turmeric burns pleasantly in your nose. You start peeling carrots, slowly watching the room. Everything here is organized not by recipes on parchment, but by oral instruction hierarchy of experience and an instinctual choreography that borders on myth. Too thick, your neighbor corrects, gesturing at your now sadly mangled carrot. You want it to pickle, not surrender. You try again. As your fingers grow sticky with root sap, you notice the head cook, perhaps more priestess than chef, chanting softly under her breath as she arranges jars on a drying rack. You catch fragments. May it sour with purpose. May it cure with balance. May it last longer than the harvest. A preservation prayer. Historians still argue whether these murmured chants were true religious rites or just mnemonic devices to pass down techniques, but you swear the carrots seem to listen better when she speaks. You help pack sliced turnips into wide-necked clay jars, layering each with crushed mustard seed, fresh dill, a splash of vinegar, and a pinch of something that smells suspiciously like crushed coriander and regret. The recipe is old, your neighbor says. Babylon had pickles before Babylon had laws. You believe her. She hands you a jar and leads you to the corner of the kitchen, where shelves rise in uneven tiers, each labeled in chalk, some recent, some faded. Names, dates, a symbol for the season. One jar is marked only with the cuneiform for grief. That one, she says, noticing your gaze. Preserved after a funeral. Not for eating, just for remembering. You place your jar beside one labeled mid-year with a tiny fish scratched into the side. A little offering to time. As you step back, you see the whole wall differently. Not storage, not even cuisine. A library written in vinegar and vegetables. Elsewhere, someone drops a ladle and everyone flinches. It's not just the noise, there's something sacred about keeping rhythm here. Drop spills and mistakes are met with quiet judgment and the occasional muttered blessing to offset the chaos. Salt it twice, someone advises, to hide the shame. You grin. The room smells now of ginger and garlic, deep and rich with that undercurrent of age-old ambition that always clings to a proper pickle. You watch as two girls crush grape leaves with tiny fists, stuffing them into a jar filled with shredded beetroot and a swirl of honey. Their mother supervises from the sidearms crossed mouth, twitching with a smile she refuses to show. First time she says seeing you watch. They'll mess it up. Will you eat it? She shrugs. Probably. That's how we know what went wrong. Mistakes are part of the method here. Failure is fermented too. You leave the kitchen just as dusk begins to bleed orange into the clay walls. Your hands smell like dill and vinegar, and your shirt has a small splash of brine in a place you won't notice until bedtime. But your mind, it feels clearer? Because Babylon preserves more than vegetables. It preserves voices, recipes, rituals, warnings, joys. Things that mattered once and still matter now. And in this strange brined corner of the city, the humble turnip sits among beetroot and garlic and pomegranate rind, waiting patiently to be remembered. You turn a corner and walk straight into a street musician, his reed pipe shrill and fast, his foot tapping a rhythm known only to him. You apologize. He doesn't stop playing, just nods in time. Behind him, a boy holds a jar high above his head, offering sips to passers-by. Pickle wine, he cries, for when your gods won't listen. You politely decline. Two cats fight over a fish bone in the gutter. A dog barks at nothing. Somewhere above, laundry snaps in the evening breeze as if even the tunics have opinions about the pickling process. You press your hand to the turnip-shaped token at your waist, newly tied into your belt, and realize you came here to learn about history. But what you're really learning is preservation. And not just in clay jars, but in memory, in food, in the quiet rituals that shape a city's soul. You follow the river back toward the quieter districts. Stomach softly full from stolen spoonfuls and a barely legal ladle sip of fermented onion wine. The evening has ripened into that deep lavender hush where the city's edges blur and everyone moves more slowly as if Rome or Babylon or wherever time has carried you is winding itself down for the night. But not quite yet, because now you're headed to one of the city's odder institutions. A place neither temple nor tavern, but somehow both. A place known depending on who you ask as the House of Listening. There's no sign. Just a heavy door between two silent bakeries marked only by a carved ear and a stylized radish. Or maybe a beet. It's hard to tell. The carving is old, worn smooth by weather and what you hope is reverent fingertip, not careless donkey cart. You knock. A soft series of raps learned from someone who whispered it into your ear between bites of turnip cake and civic gossip. The door opens just enough for a woman with slate gray eyes and the posture of a librarian to peer through. Are you here to speak? She asks. No, you say, to listen. She nods. The door swings wide. Inside the space is candlelit and hush-heavy. Clay benches curve along the walls, woven mats cover the floors, and there in the center is a shallow bowl of water with sprigs of mint and floating orange peels. The scent is fresh, anchoring. Everyone here is quiet. Some with closed eyes. Some watching the door as if waiting for an answer they'd written to themselves days ago. You're motioned to sit by a reed-thin man in a robe dyed the color of old plums. This is where we remember the things that never made it to tablets, he says, barely louder than the flicker of the nearest flame. A small stage at the front, a single wooden crate, really serves as the platform for whoever is brave enough to stand and tell their story. And tonight's theme is roots. Of course it is. A young boy speaks, first voice cracking in places, but bold nonetheless. He recounts how his grandfather taught him to tell the difference between wild parsnip and true turnip by smell alone. They smell like home, he says. Like the inside of a coat after rain. A few people nod. Next, an older woman in a robe of teal and russet speaks. Her words spill slow and careful like hot syrup. She tells the story of a woman who escaped a ruined city with nothing but a satchel of dried turnip slices. How she chewed them through border checkpoints and marriage offers and heartbreak, and how she planted one in a forgotten yard, and how now it feeds the bees. Historians still argue she adds as if reciting from memory whether that city ever existed. But I do not argue with bees. You don't either. Someone recites a poem. Another tells a joke so dry it might be legal currency in Babylon. A child sings a one-verse song about tuber shapes that turns into a round and makes everyone smile in that way you smile when you're surprised by joy. The reed-thin host eventually takes the stage. He speaks softly of civic pride of food, as inheritance of turnips boiled in 7 different languages, but always served with the same quiet care. And then the final speaker of the night rises. She's small, wrapped in many layers, her face nearly invisible beneath folds of linen. But when she speaks, her voice is steady. She says only this: my mother salted the roots, my daughter sweetens them. I try to remember both. No one claps, no one needs to. The night continues slower now, like breath at rest. You step outside with the others, each person quietly carrying some echo of what they just heard. Some are weeping, some smiling, some just walking. The woman with slate gray eyes passes you a folded cloth packet. 3 slices, she says. Preserved last winter. Take them somewhere they haven't been. You thank her. She nods once and disappears back inside. You open the cloth later, sitting beside a carved pillar where ivy winds around old graffiti. The slices are dark, thin, curved at the edges. Like coins, like answers. Like punctuation marks at the end of a whispered sentence. You eat one. It's sharp, sour, and then quietly sweet. You keep the others. Because some tastes aren't for right now. They're for remembering. As you sit, you look around and truly notice what Babylon keeps outside its archives and monuments. A cracked mural painted with turnips arranged in a spiral like a sunburst. A boy chalking "Love Your Roots" beneath a stolen cartwheel. A basket of tubers left at the base of a statue offering snack or silent protest, it's hard to say. And under your sandal, a small scrap of papyrus barely legible "Boil first, speak later." Practical advice, perhaps. Or something older. Something sacred. You walk again this time without needing direction. The city carries you now. Its alleys like sentences, its torches like commas, its corners soft as breath. You hum a melody you don't remember learning. It tastes faintly of vinegar. By the time you return to your lodging, the stars are a slow drip across the sky. The turnip-shaped token waits for you on the sill, patient as always. You place your second slice beside it. An offering. To memory. To silence. To the strangeness of being fed by things the world forgets. You sleep with your hands still scented by mint and root. And the dreams when they come are warm and deep. You rise with the hush that lingers before dawn, that tender space where the city hasn't quite remembered itself. A few carts clatter early across the stones. A rooster clears its throat somewhere uphill, but otherwise Babylon, or what you now imagine as this version of ancient tangled Rome, breathes slowly. Just like you. The turnip slices are still where you left them. One remains. You tuck it into the fold of your tunic like a talisman, and you step outside. Today your feet know exactly where they're going. The temple district. But not for gods. You've heard whispers, quiet ones, of a gathering that happens on the temple steps just before sunrise. Not a ceremony exactly, not a protest either, something in between. By the time you arrive, the sky is soft with lavender. A line of figures sits quietly along the massive front stairway of an old temple, once dedicated to a forgotten harvest deity, Ninurta maybe, or Ops, depending on your source. The inscriptions are faded, the carvings dulled, but someone has placed fresh herbs, bay fennel, sage along the altar stone. And next to each offering, a root, turnips mostly, but also radishes, beets, and the occasional noble carrot. You take a seat on the lowest stair, feeling the cool stone seep into your bones. The others don't acknowledge you exactly, but they let you be. Which is enough. A woman rises, older, broad-shouldered, sun-creased. She carries a long-handled ladle and she taps it once against the stone. Begin, she says. And so they do. One by one, the participants walk to the altar and speak. Not loudly. Not dramatically. They offer small truths. I buried 3 roots last season. Only one grew. I named it Patience. My son is learning to roast without burning. He burned, but he laughed. My neighbor shared stew. I didn't ask what was in it, but I'm still alive. Simple, mundane confessions. Utterly human. Then the woman with the ladle nods at you. It's your turn. You don't think, you just rise. And what tumbles from your lips is something you hadn't planned to say. I came here chasing jokes about vegetables. I thought it would be clever. But I found stories, and I listened. And I think I understand more now. A pause. And I'm sorry for ever mocking turnips. A few people chuckle. Someone murmurs, "We've all been there." You place your last slice on the stone. The woman nods again. Someone begins to hum. A simple melody, circular and ancient. Others join. It grows not in volume, but in layers, like threads weaving through one another. The sun crests the eastern wall. The temple glows. And then just like that, the moment is done. No applause, no epiphany. Just shared breath. Shared root. You walk with a man in saffron afterward, his fingers ink-stained, his robes dust-flecked. You know, he says historians still argue whether any of this was real. You look at him. He gestures back at the temple steps. The rituals, the poems, the recipes. Some say they're exaggerations. Others say they're projections. Wishful thinking imposed on fractured ruins. You nod. But he adds, what is history if not memory? We agree to believe. You part ways at a fork in the street, and your feet lead you instinctively now toward the hills. Not to escape the city, but to see it. All of it. You climb a narrow path, breath shallow hands, skimming old stone as the slope grows steep. And then finally you crest the top. And there it is. Babylon, Rome. Whatever name your dream has taken, its rooftops shimmer in the dawn haze. Columns rise from plazas like frozen notes. Smoke curls gently from braziers and chimneys. Water glints on the Tiber, and beyond the land stretches soft and gold. Scattered across it, if you look closely, gardens, plots, balconies stuffed with pots, patches of root and leaf and soil stubborn and sacred. You sit on a low wall, pull out your wax token, and turn it in your fingers. It catches the light, not brightly, just enough. You think of Lucan's scrolls, of the Root Museum, of the puppet show, of sweetened cakes and turnip banquets, of gods and ghosts and graffiti. You think of everyone who passed down a recipe, a joke, a superstition, or a root. And you think maybe this was never about vegetables at all. Maybe it was about continuity. Because roots are patient, roots wait, roots hold, and when the empire forgets they bloom anyway. You rise just as a soft wind carries the scent of baked earth and rosemary. The city begins to stretch and yawn. Bells ring, doors creak. People spill into streets like stories waiting to be told. And you have more to listen to. You make your way down from the hill slowly, each footstep deliberate like you're trying not to wake the city too quickly. It's a strange feeling being awake before Rome is. The world feels more fragile in this light, like the cobblestones might dissolve if you step too hard, or a wall might sigh and admit how tired it really is. And somehow after everything your feet take you back to the marketplace, the Forum Holatorium again. But this time it's not the peak of the day. It's early. The stalls are just being unpacked. Cloth awnings flap as they're tied in place. Crates thud onto worn wooden counters. Bread baskets are still warm from the ovens wrapped in cloth, steaming faintly like secret messages. You spot a familiar face. Cassia, the collector of culinary relics, who once whispered that Rome forgets and roots remember. She's not in her usual linen. Today she wears a russet tunic, simple and slightly stained, with her hair tied back in a strip of faded indigo cloth. In her arms is a basket of fresh herbs and, yes, turnips. She sees you, nods once. Hungry, she asks. You shrug. Always. She doesn't offer a scroll or a fact. She just tears off a hunk of still warm bread, wraps it around a slice of soft turnip, and hands it to you without ceremony. It's quiet eating, chewy and grounding. Behind her, a young man fumbles with a scale, trying to balance a mound of beans. An older woman laughs at him, slaps his hand away, and resets the weight like it's second nature. Across the square, a father holds his daughter on his shoulders as they examine jars of pickled onions. She points. He buys. She grins. You chew slowly and watch. Because this is history too. Not just the monuments and marble busts and epic poems, but these tiny repeated gestures. The rhythm of hands working, the sound of coins clinking against wood, the casual poetry of everyday lives. Cassia notices your attention. This, she says softly, is the part the historians always get wrong. You tilt your head. They look for meaning in the inscriptions, the statues, the heroes. But the real city lived here in bread and soup and roots, in markets and gossip and stolen fruit. She glances sideways, lowers her voice. Historians still argue whether Rome fed itself efficiently, whether the grain dole was enough, whether the system was corrupt beyond repair. But I think they missed the point. What's the point, you ask? She gestures wide, encompassing the whole waking forum. Survival, continuity, laughter, and turnips. You laugh, and suddenly your thoughts spiral, not in worry, but in awe. Because for all its ambition and cruelty and vanity, Rome never collapsed in a single moment. It faded. It shifted. It became something else. But it also lingered in these everyday acts. In how people boiled a root, in how they sat down together, in how they passed recipes down like lullabies. You finish the bread, thank Cassia, and wander further into the market. Someone's selling dyes. Indigo saffron matter swirled in ceramic bowls like paint, waiting to become a memory. Another man sells beeswax candles shaped like tiny animals. A boy chases a chicken through a maze of baskets, his sandals flapping wildly. You pass a butcher who's chalked a special on his board today, only lamb shanks and free root advice. You pause. Root advice, you ask? He grins. One free proverb per customer. You raise an eyebrow. He clears his throat. Never trust a man who peels a turnip before boiling it. He's hiding something. You snort. That's not real. Neither is most of Rome, he replies, handing you a sliver of meat on a skewer. You wander on. There's a booth where an elderly couple is selling bundles of dried herbs tied with red twine. A placard reads, for stew, or for dreams. You don't ask. You just buy one. Later you pause at a stall run by a girl no older than 10 with smudges on her cheeks and an air of absolute authority. She offers candied turnip slices dipped in honey and sea salt. Only 5 left, she says. They go fast. You buy one. It tastes like ambition pretending to be dessert. She points at your belt. That's a root token, isn't it? You nod. She holds up her wrist a charm made of wood carved into a tiny sprouting turnip. My uncle gave it to me, she says. Said it's for strength. Said our family survived famine once and this reminds us. You nod again softer this time. Because you're starting to understand how many people carry these stories in pockets and pouches and half-told jokes. You walk again. Back through the edge of the forum. Past a woman telling fortunes with fennel seeds and a man playing the same 3 notes on a cracked flute. Past someone selling old shoes and someone else selling old lies. And you find yourself thinking maybe the best thing you've learned this whole time isn't buried in an archive or etched on a scroll. Maybe it's this: the most sacred things don't announce themselves. They simmer. They stew. They grow underground slowly and quietly, and when they surface, if they surface, they do so with no fanfare. No marble, no conquest. Just presence. Just flavor. Just enough. You stand for a while on the edge of it all, holding your charm, chewing the last of the candied slice and wondering how many more centuries of this rhythm the city still has in it. You hope many. You leave the market full in belly and mind, wandering back through alleys that feel more familiar now. Rome doesn't change really, it just shifts like a dream that's aware you're watching. You pass a baker's doorway, where steam curls from a row of fresh loaves lined up like sleepy soldiers, their crust crackling as they cool. You breathe deep, the scent of yeast and ash wrapping around you like a blanket. Somewhere, a woman sings as she sweeps off-key, but lovingly. You walk and your feet eventually bring you somewhere unexpected. Again, the public baths. But not the grand ones like Agrippa's or Caracalla's. This is a smaller establishment, a neighborhood bath. It has no statues, no mosaics of sea gods, no marble benches. Just brick walls darkened with age, a low-arched entrance, and a sign carved crudely into woodworm, clean. Mostly honest water. You hesitate, then enter. Inside the air is thick with heat and stories. Men sit with knees high and expressions soft. Children dart between puddles, giggling, clutching cloths too large for their bodies. An older man leans against the wall, eyes closed, lips twitching like he's arguing with a dream. The water smells faintly of rosemary and mineral salts. There's a rusted brazier in the corner crackling gently, adding its rhythm to the hum of low voices. You find a spot on a stone bench, close your eyes, and just listen. I told him it was barley, one man says, but it was turnip the whole time. Laughter. You're a monster. You said you liked it. Another voice quieter, more thoughtful. My father used to salt them and leave them in jars by the window. Said the sun made them braver. You mean pickling? He said bravery. No one argues. You open your eyes. The steam has fogged the corners of the room, turning it into something soft and borderless like memory itself. A woman across from you is humming a lullaby while wringing out her hair. A toddler clings to her leg, fascinated by the echo his own splashes make. The water ripples. And you realize even here, even in this quiet, steamy cocoon, the root persists. Not literally, perhaps. No one's waving a turnip in your face, but in the jokes, in the meals they talk about, in the stories they share. It's like the vegetable has become shorthand for endurance. A symbol people use when they want to talk about what really matters, but don't want to sound like poets. You lie back, letting your head rest against the warm stone. The heat seeps into your bones. Your limbs feel boneless, heavy and perfect. Someone behind you mutters historians still argue whether roots were part of daily bathing rituals. Someone else snorts. Historians never bathe. You smile. After a while, you rise, dry off, and step back into your sandals. Your feet feel lighter. Not because the path ahead is easier, but because it's familiar now. You know the cobbles. You trust their rhythm. You walk. Past a mural where someone has painted a crude cartoon of a turnip punching a senator. Past a beggar who, instead of asking for coin, offers riddles. His chalkboard reads, "I grow in the dark, feed the weary, and outlast kings. What am I?" You don't answer. Just smile. Because the answer is everywhere. Eventually your path leads you to the edge of the Aventine Hill once more. It's a good spot for thinking, for watching, for ending things. The view is wide rooftops and rust and gold columns broken like old teeth birds, swirling in lazy spirals above temple ruins. Smoke rises from cook fires. Linen flaps from windows. Laughter drifts up from somewhere you can't see. And in your hand that root-shaped token still rests. Worn now. Warm from being held, but still solid. You sit down on a low stone wall, the breeze gently tugging at your tunic, and you remember how this all began with a garden. A stubborn farmer and a field of rough, wrinkled vegetables that refuse to be romantic. And now the root is a religion, a metaphor, a joke, a protest, a comfort, a history, and maybe a future too. Because every civilization, every empire, every sprawling city needs its story. And sometimes that story isn't carved in triumphal arches or echoed in Senate speeches. Sometimes it's whispered in kitchens, shared in soup, etched on the margins of forgotten scrolls. Sometimes it's grown underground, quietly, persistently, without permission, and rises only when someone's hungry enough to notice. You look out across Rome. It breathes, it buzzes, it remembers, and it forgets. But not everything. Some things endure, like laughter, like stories, like a root with no right to be this meaningful. It's later now. The sky is shifting again from dusky lavender to that deeper, older blue that hints at stars still waiting their turn. You stay on the wall longer than expected, legs swinging slightly, head tilted just enough to catch the first hint of night air against your cheek. Rome as always carries on around you unbothered and eternal. But you're different. Not transformed exactly, that would be too dramatic for a story about tubers. But altered. Recalibrated, maybe. You've seen too much root-based sincerity not to be. Eventually you stand. Your feet carry you without needing to ask where. Past the baker's window, yes, the same one. He's asleep now, flour dusting his beard, a single loaf cooling like an offering to the moon. Past the fountain where the water still trickles and the scratched graffiti still insists turnips are funnier than garlic. It's growing on you. And then somehow past the butcher's stall again. The smell's the same fennel and old ambition, but something else lingers too. Maybe a whisper. Maybe a memory. Maybe just the afterimage of that tiny root-shaped museum tucked behind a wall most people never notice. You don't knock this time. You just tip your head quietly. Gratitude doesn't need repetition. From there, your path winds back toward the river. The Tiber looks gentler now, like it's dozing off too. Ripples catch stray torchlight, making everything shimmer just enough to feel magical without trying too hard. You pause on the bridge and realize something strange. You're not holding the token anymore. Not in your hand, at least. You check your bag. Nothing. Pockets empty. You retrace a few steps, mild panic fluttering in your chest. But then you stop. Because maybe that root-shaped piece of wood was never meant to be kept. Maybe it slipped out on purpose. Left behind like a planted seed. Or dropped gently near someone else who needed it next. That's the thing about symbols. They travel, quietly, unnoticed, until they matter again. You lean on the bridge's edge, staring down at the moon-glint water. It flows slow and steady, carrying secrets from hills and kitchens, temples and markets. You imagine it's whispering recipes, riddles, and long-forgotten jokes, told over communal stew pots. And as you watch a single leaf floats by pale, curled, trailing ripples like an idea, you sigh. A good sigh. The kind that loosens something in your chest. Behind you, footsteps echo, a couple murmuring, someone whistling off-key, the faint scuffle of sandals on stone. You don't turn. You let the night hold you. And in that moment, you remember something Lucan said way back under the olive tree about vegetable-based virtue. It sounded absurd then. But now, it feels obvious. Because when you trace Rome's heartbeat, not the one from conquest or coin, but the real one, it's not in the marble. It's not in the laws. It's not even in the literature, beautiful as it is. It's in the rhythm of meals, shared crops, harvested soup stirred, and jokes made about how figs are divas and turnips are dependable. It's in how people keep going, especially when they don't have to, especially when no one's watching. And you've been watching and listening and maybe even just a little belonging. Eventually your legs begin moving again, guiding you through alleys quieter now than ever before. A dog barks once in the distance, then thinks better of it. A shutter creaks closed. Somewhere above an old woman hums a lullaby you'll never quite remember. You pass a shrine with fresh herbs at its base, basil thyme, maybe a little rosemary. And nestled there, half buried in shadows, is a single perfect turnip. You don't touch it. You just nod, then step onward, back toward the familiar corners. The soft light of your lodging, the stone windowsill still warmed by the day's heat. You collapse onto your cot with the sort of exhaustion that feels earned, not inflicted. And you think, maybe you didn't solve anything today. Maybe Rome didn't unveil its deepest truth. But you learned enough. You learned about quiet reverence, about how history isn't always etched in stone, it's sometimes pickled in vinegar or whispered during bathhouse gossip. You learned how one route can grow into a map, and how a map can lead you home. You close your eyes. The city sighs around you, and for once you don't feel like a visitor. You feel like part of it. You're still. Breath shallow. Not quite asleep, but not fully here either. Outside Rome dreams. Not the grand toga-clad dreams of empire and oration, but simpler ones. Dreams of bakers' hands, kneading dough of cats curled under carts of amphorae, cooling in river-fed cellars. Dreams where roots grow slowly and without applause. Your mind drifts again. To that turnip on the shrine. You can see it so clearly now. The way the moonlight caught on its smooth skin. The way it didn't need explanation or label. It just was unbothered, complete, quietly defiant. A prayer without words. Historians still argue you recall whether those offerings meant anything to the gods. But maybe that was never the point. Maybe the offering was for us. A reminder. That meaning isn't always carved or declared. Sometimes it's buried, or boiled, or passed around at a festival with a grin and a handful of herbs. You shift beneath your blanket, feeling the day settle deeper into your bones. And just like that, your thoughts curl backward again. To Flavia's rooftop garden. To the turnip puppet show. To the clerk with his smug wax tablet. To the porridge with too much fennel. To the old man whispering about roots outliving people. To Gaius and his wine that tasted like betrayal and friendship at the same time. To everything and everyone who somehow in their own quiet way taught you that surviving is sacred, that the humble too are holy, and that nothing ever really vanishes so long as someone remembers, even if that someone is just you. Lying here now, the weight of a root-shaped memory tucked into your chest like a charm. You exhale, and imagine Rome blinking slowly around you, letting go. Its rooftops stretch and sigh, its markets pause, its river hushes, and you drift like a leaf on water, carried not by conquest, but by stories. And turnips. Word count 1, Nordon 12. Wind down final 300 words. And now as the journey slows, let yourself rest fully. Sink deeper into the quiet. There's no more history to chase tonight. No scrolls left unrolled. No riddles to untangle beneath moonlight. Just the gentle comfort of knowing you wandered a city made of stone and stories, and found softness in something as small as a root. Your breath slows. The night deepens, and still Rome glows somewhere behind your eyes. In gentle torchlight flickering on old walls, in whispers about turnips and taxes and truths, in all those little moments tucked between the big ones that hold the world together. It's okay now to let go of names and years and lists, to not worry about what was fact and what was folklore, because the rhythm beneath it all remains the soft hum of survival, the warmth of shared meals, the steady bloom of laughter between strangers. And that's enough. That's always been enough. So allow yourself now to drift even further into the hush between thoughts, where everything slows, where the soil is soft, where the roots grow deep and undisturbed. Tomorrow will come, with roosters and bakers and questions. But for now, just sleep. You're safe here, you're warm, and you are not alone. Not in this city of memory, not in this story. So close your eyes and rest. You've earned it.